As we approach the climax to this story's first arc, it is time for us to dive into Kivotos' most notorious police force and the political upheaval that would soon affect the heart of this city. As always, I will be delving into extensive spoilers for this game. This particular video will include spoilers for Part 1 of The Rabbit of Epilogue, as well as large sections of Part 1 from Volume F. However, if you're okay with spoilers and you still want to watch, then please feel free to do so. Welcome to the newest volume of Lore Archive. As with all my Lore Archive videos, I have written this to be less of a lecture and more of a story. This volume of Lore Archive will weave together the events unfolding with SRT, Valkyrie, and the capital of Kivotos, as well as my interpretations of the events that occur. This video is leading us towards the ending of our very first arc of Blue Archive. This particular video, as a result, will build upon the events of Abydos, the Eden Treaty, and Millennium, and will feature large portions from Volume F, Part 1. However, this first section of Volume F covers a huge number of events occurring simultaneously, and some of these events are only relevant for later parts of our story. So, as a result, I have made the decision to cover all the relevant events in today's video, and the remainder of Part 1 will be combined with Parts 2, 3, and 4 from Volume F in our next climactic video. As usual, this video is quite long, so don't feel like you have to tackle it all in one go. I'll be leaving lots of timestamps throughout this video, so you can find your place if you need to return to this later. With my preamble now out of the way, it's finally time for our newest addition to the Lore Archive anthology. Within the quiet offices of Schale, in the early hours of the morning, Sensei was finishing up the last of their paperwork for the General Student Council. After all the long hours helping the students of Kivotos and writing up expense reports for their many missions, Sensei was utterly exhausted. And before they could help themselves, the teacher had dozed off at their desk, the grip on their pen loosening as they fell into slumber. However, as soon as the teacher fell asleep, unsettling dreams began to plague their vision. A hazy figure was towering above them with a gun pointed firmly at the teacher's chest. Despite Sensei's best efforts, it was difficult to make out the features of this ominous figure, almost like they were blurred and obscured by static. And yet, the barrel of the gun remained perfectly in focus, with a dark, gloved finger slowly pulling the trigger to fire. With a gasp, Sensei awoke from the dream in a panic, their heart pounding in their ears. They were still in Schale, the quiet hum of the crafting chamber filling the air around them. Wiping the sweat from their forehead, the teacher hurriedly rose to their feet. Sometime soon, the teacher desperately needed a vacation. They were so overworked that stress was manifesting into their dreams, taking the form of their paperwork, literally trying to murder them. That had to be it. Otherwise, such an ominous dream could only mean bad things were still yet to come. Looking out the window, the teacher could see the enormous form of the Sanctum Tower several blocks away, its long shadow looming over the capital of Kivotos. Both Schale and the Sanctum Tower resided in the district of Utnapishtim, or the DU, as it was also called, the capital district of Kivotos. At the center of the district of Utnapishtim was the Sanctum Tower, the enormous office of the General Student Council that oversaw the entirety of the Academy city. If the individual academies acted like states or provinces, then the General Student Council was the federal government. However, despite all the time that the teacher had spent in Kivotos, they were still woefully unfamiliar with the inner politics of the Sanctum Tower, and they were determined to change that fact. The sun was beginning to rise over Kivotos, and Sensei could see that it was almost time for their meeting with the acting head of the General Student Council, Nanagami Rin. After the Sanctum Tower president had mysteriously disappeared, Rin had become the unfortunate acting leader of Kivotos' highest office, and she had requested a meeting with the teacher to review their latest expense reports. Although the teacher wasn't looking forward to reviewing expense reports, it was the perfect excuse to get their mind off of the horrible nightmare they had just woken up from. And besides, checking in with Rin and the General Student Council could give them more insight into how Kivotos was currently being run. Tucking away Arona and the Shatim chest into their satchel, the teacher headed out from Schale, walking towards the tower that loomed over the entire city. Little did Sensei know that they were about to get a front seat for the turmoil within the General Student Council, and they would soon discover how a sinister alliance, a corrupt officer, and an idealistic leader fought to bring justice to the Sanctum Tower. It had been some time since Sensei had last set foot inside the highest office of Kivotos. By and large, Sensei was able to submit any reports and documentation digitally, but Rin had requested an in-person meeting for this latest submission, and that concerned the teacher. As the acting head of the General Student Council, Rin sought to run Kivotos as effectively as possible in the absence of the former General Council president. And that meant that clerical errors and typos on reports were unacceptable under her watch. Despite the teacher's best efforts, their latest reports had been riddled with small errors, and although Rin did her best to be understanding, the expense reports still needed to be corrected before Rin could process them. As Rin began reviewing all the problematic documents with the teacher, Sensei couldn't help noticing how tired the acting president looked. Her glasses helped to obscure it, but there were dark circles underneath her eyes. After the General Student Council president had disappeared, the duties of the Sanctum Tower had fallen on Rin's shoulders. And although Rin was a diligent administrator, the burden of running Kivotos in the former president's absence was clearly taking its toll. Before the teacher could voice their concerns aloud, Sensei's train of thought was interrupted by hurried footsteps, and an unfamiliar General Council member appeared in the lobby. And she carried an enormous stack of paperwork as she hurried to Rin's side. Although the teacher had never met the girl before, Sensei recalled that Rin had an executive secretary named Iwabitsu Ayumu. With tremendous unease, Sensei watched as Ayumu began frantically whispering in Rin's ear, catching only a few short phrases such as SRT, demolition, and protest. Sensing the situation was urgent, Sensei leaned forward in their seat. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know," Sensei asked, hesitantly interrupting the two General Council members. For a moment, Rin looked like she wanted to refuse the teacher's offer, determined to solve the dilemma herself. But after a few seconds, she sighed aloud. "The General Student Council should be handling this, but we've encountered a small issue," she said aloud. "How much do you know about SRT and Valkyrie Academies, Sensei?" Within Kivotos, the General Student Council served as the federal government, and they also controlled parts of federal land that did not belong to any one school. The corridors between academies, as well as the district of Utnapishtim, all fell under the Sanctum Tower's control, and the General Student Council had created a police force to watch over these regions. In the current day, this police force was split into two separate academies, Valkyrie and SRT. Valkyrie, the larger and older of the two police schools, served as the main force under General Council control. Valkyrie students trained in one of three disciplines to assist the General Council's various functions. Members of Valkyrie's Public Safety Division handled traffic control, citizen information, and smaller complaints within the citizenry, whereas Valkyrie's Security Bureau were the main muscle of the police school, responding to outbreaks of violence or conflict. The final section of Valkyrie was the Peace Bureau, the somewhat ironically named division that specialized in interrogation and anti-terrorism. SRT Academy, on the other hand, were a new force within Kivotos. SRT were the special agents of the Sanctum Tower, comprised of a small, elite group of students. SRT intervened when the General Student Council needed to apprehend dangerous delinquents, regardless of whether they were in Sanctum Tower territory or not. Prior to the creation of Schale, SRT Academy was the only organization with extrajudicial authority. And while Schale resolved issues through careful negotiation and compromise, SRT exercised their full military authority to arrest some of the most notorious criminals in Kivotos. One such group of students, the 7 prisoners, had only been captured by the General Student Council after SRT intervened. In particular, Kosaka Wakamo, one of the most destructive 7 prisoners, had evaded capture from Valkyrie's Security Bureau, only to succumb to SRT's elite Fox Squad. Despite SRT's efficiency, however, the extrajudicial school's existence was a double-edged sword. They were an immensely powerful, well-funded group of militants who only answered to the president of the Sanctum Tower, and that created apprehension and distrust within Kivotos. Having such a powerful force answer only to one person caused tremendous unease, not only amongst the various academies, but also within the General Council itself. The Board of Administration officers, who served as the cabinet of the General Student Council, were unable to issue orders to SRT without the president's intervention. Not even the Chief of Defense could order SRT to act, even though the Chief of Defense was in charge of Valkyrie. And that caused friction within the Sanctum Tower for many, many years. When the General Council president went missing, all that festering unease burst open. As the interim president of the Sanctum Tower, Nanagami Rin became an outspoken critic of SRT. There were now 2 extrajudicial offices in Kivotos, and Schale had demonstrated that soft power and negotiation were tremendously effective methods of maintaining peace in the city. SRT, on the other hand, continued to be feared amongst the Kivotos academies and served as a constant reminder that the General Student Council could wipe out their enemies at any moment. With all of this being said, why should SRT continue to exist when Schale had been created instead? Arguments began to break out within the General Council over how to proceed. Some members agreed with Rin, stating that SRT's existence had funneled away funds and weaponry from Valkyrie, putting the Sanctum Tower's main police force in a worse position, while others stated that closing down SRT would be a massive overreach of Rin's authority, casting the Sanctum Tower in an unfavorable light right after the president had disappeared. Without a majority agreement, the General Council decided to set aside the matter and return to it later, until the unthinkable happened. To the horror of the Sanctum Tower, the SRT Fox Squad had learned that Rin and several board members sought to close their school, and the most powerful group within SRT staged an attack on the Sanctum Tower, seriously injuring the most vocal proponents of SRT's dissolution. The General Council fell into chaos. Not only had multiple board members been severely injured, but the timing of the attack had been too convenient. The Fox Squad had known about the council's internal discussions, as well as which members had been the most vocal about dissolving SRT. Either there was a traitor within the General Student Council, or the Fox Squad had bugged the entire Sanctum Tower without anyone knowing. Either way, it was clear that SRT was too dangerous to let roam freely, and while the Sanctum Tower was searched for wiretaps, the General Council had to make a decision. Acting President Rin, who had managed to escape the attack relatively unharmed, announced that SRT would be dissolved and merged with Valkyrie. Although this would almost certainly be seen as a power grab, Rin felt like it was the only way to remove SRT's extrajudicial authority while still retaining the talented students within its ranks. Under Rin's orders, the most powerful forces within Valkyrie, the security and the peace bureaus, would be mobilized to retrieve SRT's weapons and to arrest the Fox Squad for their attack on the General Council. However, when Valkyrie reached the SRT campus, the Fox Squad was nowhere to be found. Instead, the younger Rabbit Squad remained behind, determined to fight off the Valkyrie forces. Although the General Council had managed to successfully close the SRT Academy grounds, the Rabbit Squad set up a temporary military base in a nearby park. SRT was located nearby Kawasagi Town, a largely deserted neighborhood of the DU, and the Rabbit Squad had used that to their advantage to secure Kawasagi Park as their new base of operations. They might not have access to the school grounds anymore, but these students were determined not to be merged with Valkyrie. Despite being a squad of only 4 students, the young Rabbit Squad had managed to successfully thwart the advances of both the security and peace bureaus, and the General Student Council was running out of options to stop the fighting. As Rin and Ayumu finished explaining the situation, Sensei was astonished that they'd never been informed about the Fox Squad's attack, particularly since it left the General Council in a precarious position. But for now, they'd have to address this later. Right now, SRT's youngest squad was successfully fending off Valkyrie's most elite forces, and if Valkyrie went down, then there was reasonable fear that the Rabbit Squad would come for the General Council next, just like the Fox Squad had. Sensei's immediate goal was clear. They needed to stop the fighting between Valkyrie and the Rabbit Squad, and then try to determine the best step forward for the SRT students and the General Student Council. Sensei made their way to the edges of Kawasagi Park, where the SRT Rabbit Squad had stationed themselves to fight back against Valkyrie. Near the park's edge, Valkyrie's Peace Bureau Director, Ogata Kana, was trying to maintain shaky control of the situation. For an interrogations officer, the Peace Bureau Director was more gruff than Sensei had expected. Director Kana was missing a chunk of her left ear, although this appeared to be a pre-existing injury, and her mouth was permanently turned downwards into a scowl. However, Sensei had dealt with their fair share of unfriendly students, and without missing a beat, the teacher hurried to Kana's side to begin reviewing the situation. Despite her prickly appearance, Kana was quick to bring the teacher up to speed. The 4 SRT students were a formidable force, with more state-of-the-art weaponry and ammunition than Valkyrie could dream of. It left Valkyrie with few options to successfully apprehend the SRT students, and Kana was beginning to entertain the idea of asking for help from the Gehenna Prefect team and their formidable leader, Hina. However, as Kana was laying out her plan, Sensei heard excited voices from nearby and looked over to see the reporters Mai and Shinon from the Kronos School of Journalism. Despite the best efforts of the Valkyrie officers, the Kronos reporters had already caught wind of the situation, and they were manning a news drone to get close-up footage of the SRT students. On the Kronos display, Sensei could make out 3 of the 4 rabbit students, who were all wearing the same rabbit-like helmets and uniforms. However, as the audio of the live recording came through, it was immediately apparent that the SRT students were arguing with each other about how best to shoot down the Kronos news drone. Two of the SRT members, the excitable Kazekura Moe and the stubborn Sorai Saki, were insisting that they unleash their full firepower at the reporter's drone, blowing it up in a tremendous explosive display. Nearby them, a stern-looking student named Tsukiyuki Miyako was trying to talk Moe and Saki down from wasting all their ammunition on a single drone, stating that they were already running low on ammunition after their prolonged battle with Valkyrie. From what it looked like, Sensei suspected that Miyako was the leader of the rabbit squad, with Saki and Moe serving as the ground and air support of their operation. But it sounded like Miyako's authority was not completely solidified. Through the recording, Sensei could barely make out the voice of Kasumizawa Miyu, the squad's fourth member, but it sounded like the girl was positioned some distance away from the park, communicating to Miyako through a walkie-talkie. Miyu was begging Miyako to let her come back from her post, but Miyako tried to reassure Miyu that the girl needed to stay at her position in case more Valkyrie students tried advancing on them. However, before Miyako could finish talking, she was promptly interrupted by Saki and Moe putting together all of the Rabbit Squad's explosives and proceeding to unleash them at the drone recording their location. The Kronos footage immediately went black, and the concussive boom of detonations echoed through the air, indicating that the SRT students had indeed shot down the Kronos news drone. But Sensei had already gathered exactly what they needed. This live broadcast had been more revealing than the SRT girls realized. Based on the information that Sensei had learned, it appeared that the SRT Rabbit Squad were indeed well equipped, but their cohesion as a squad was still lacking, and they had become so caught up in the excitement of their situation that they were blowing through their ammunition reserves. That single blast had consumed a tremendous amount of firepower, and that put Valkyrie in a better position to launch a counterattack. Privately, Sensei had no idea why the senior Fox Squad had not joined their rabbit underclassmen in staging this protest, but it did mean that the inexperienced rabbit members were now more exposed, and Valkyrie could capitalize on that to bring them down. Although Valkyrie's security bureau was officially out of commission, having taken the brunt of the Rabbit Squad's gunfire, the Public Safety Bureau was still able to fight, and if SRT was running out of ammunition, then this was the perfect time to strike. Admittedly, the Valkyrie attack squad that Sensei and Kana had put together was less than ideal. It featured Valkyrie students who rarely saw any combat, and two of the members were so notorious for incompetence that even Sensei had heard of them. Nakatsukasa Kirino was an energetic traffic officer from the Public Safety Bureau who dreamt of joining the Security Bureau and proving herself as an officer of the city. But she was such an infamously bad shot that she frequently hit hostages instead of criminals during Valkyrie training programs. Nembugaki Fubuki, on the other hand, was also from the Public Safety Bureau, but she was so famously lazy that she made eating donuts and sleeping on the job into an art form. However, if Sensei's hunch was correct, then even the terrible shooting of Kirino and the lazy antics of Fubuki would come in handy for their operation. If they were going to take down the Rabbit Squad, they would need to start with Miyu. And Sensei had a plan to get around the girl's frighteningly good aim. Fubuki may be slothful above all else, but she was a good enough actress to claim more sick days than any other officer, and if she was given the right setting, she may be able to use that acting to trick Miyu into lowering her guard. After running through the plan, Fubuki headed out to Miyu's location first, who, according to the Chronos recording, was all alone from the rest of her squad. Miyu was a frighteningly skilled sniper, but from what Sensei had seen in the recording, she sounded like a very lonely girl. And as much as Sensei hated using that, it was the opportunity they needed to take Miyu out of the equation. It was difficult to pin down exactly where Miyu was, as she had successfully hidden herself in the underbrush of Kawasagi's woods. But Sensei and Kana were able to narrow down her rough location. In one quick motion, smoke bombs were tossed into the woods, obscuring Fubuki's form from Miyu. With a tremendous amount of effort for someone so characteristically lazy, Fubuki began to speak to Miyu with the same tone that the Rabbit Squad used, telling Miyu that there had been a change in plans and that Miyu should retreat to the SRT base immediately. With confusion, Miyu responded back, expressing her desire to leave her position, but wondering if it was safe yet to do so. In her moment of hesitation, Miyu rose out of the underbrush and revealed her position for everyone to see. As soon as Miyu revealed herself, Fubuki and the Peace Bureau took their chance. Miyu was only distracted for a few moments, but in one fell swoop, the Peace Bureau and Fubuki unleashed their firepower upon her, laying into the sniper before she could lift her weapon to respond. As Fubuki and the members of the Peace Bureau successfully apprehended Miyu, it was now time for Kirino and the remaining Peace Bureau squad to infiltrate SRT's home base and take down the rest of the squad. Under normal circumstances, the firepower of Saki and Moe would be too much for Kirino and the Peace Bureau to handle, but the Rabbit Squad's hubris had been their undoing. After ignoring Miyako's pleas for them to preserve ammo, Saki and Moe were now out of ammunition, and it was all too easy for Valkyrie to swoop in and incapacitate them, particularly now that Miyu was out of the picture. All that was left now was Miyako, who had started to retreat from the camp after realizing that Valkyrie had overtaken them. As she began to run, Miyako adopted a zigzag formation to make it more difficult for anyone to strike her down. But the harder an opponent was to hit, the easier it would be for Kirino to stumble her way into accidentally firing upon that target. As Miyako tried to weave in and out of the line of fire, Kirino unleashed a flurry of gunshots, all of which hit the Rabbit Squad leader square in the back, causing Miyako to collapse to the ground in a surprised gasp. Against all odds, Valkyrie and Sensei had come out of this mission successfully, apprehending the Rabbit Squad before they did any more damage. As Kirino, Fubuki, and Kana celebrated their surprising victory, Sensei reflected that this was only the beginning of their troubles. Now that the Rabbit Squad had fought back against Valkyrie, the future of all the SRT students was even more uncertain. Back at the Valkyrie headquarters, Sensei listened in as the Rabbit Squad were interrogated by Kana and the Peace Bureau officers, trying to learn whatever they could about SRT's rebellion and how much of a risk the Rabbit Squad would pose if they tried to integrate them into Valkyrie. From everyone's testimonies, none of the Rabbit Squad knew where the Fox Squad had gone. The protest in Koasagi Park had been staged solely by Miyako and the Rabbit Squad, and now that it had been unsuccessful, they were left with few options. The General Student Council had closed SRT's Academy grounds, and although the girls had nowhere to return, they still resisted the idea of becoming Valkyrie students. The interviews with Moe and Saki revealed similar motivations for their protest. Both girls saw Valkyrie as inferior and would resist integrating with them as a result, although the girls had slightly different reasons for this. As one of the most studious members of SRT, Saki was obsessed with being the best tactical fighter that she could be, even going so far as to memorize her textbooks word for word. But that meant she felt an education at Valkyrie would pale in comparison to SRT. Moe, on the other hand, was obsessed with explosives, programming, and aircrafts, all of which were expensive hobbies. Valkyrie simply didn't have the funding that SRT did, and that meant that Moe wouldn't have as many toys if she transferred schools. Interestingly, Moe's testimony also revealed that the Rabbit Squad was in possession of a single SRT helicopter. They hadn't used it for their protest, but the teacher was still surprised to find that the Rabbit Squad possessed a helicopter in the first place. Admittedly, during their protest against SRT's closure, Saki and Moe had become swept up in the excitement of their resistance, leading them to quickly blow through their ammunition reserves. But despite that, their stance was still firm. Valkyrie would not provide them the education or the resources that SRT would, and so they refused to transfer there. Meanwhile, in Miyu's interview, the lone sniper described how difficult it had been to make friends just at SRT. Although it made her a stealthy sniper, Miyu had an uncanny ability to disappear from everyone's perception, making it so that she often felt literally invisible to everyone around her. All of this had made Miyu very socially awkward. The thought of talking to anyone other than Miyako was utterly terrifying, and Miyu had supported the protest out of sheer desperation as a result. Last but not least, the leader of the Rabbit Squad, Miyako, indicated that she had led the resistance because of her unwavering belief in SRT's principles, that true justice was the path that preserved truth, and that she feared that these principles may not be upheld within Valkyrie as they were in SRT. It was a much more idealistic answer than Sensei had expected, especially given the more personal testimonies of the other Rabbit Squad members. The teacher had seen how tenuous Miyako's leadership was during the siege of Kozagi Park, but Sensei couldn't help reflecting that the Rabbit Squad had still joined up with Miyako as their leader in the first place in order to stage such a protest. They may be a dysfunctional squad, and Miyako's leadership still had a long way to go, but all of them held SRT in high esteem, and convincing them to transfer to Valkyrie was looking less and less likely by the minute. As Kana and Sensei tried to decide what to do next after hearing these testimonies, an unfamiliar figure joined them in the Valkyrie lobby. The girl had a friendly smile on her face and wore the same white and blue General Council outfit as Rin and Ayumu. With a sudden realization, Sensei recognized that this was a member of the Board of Administration, the cabinet of the Sanctum Tower, and this board member looked exhausted. Things had not been going well at the Sanctum Tower, and it was having its toll on everyone who worked there. At the sight of the board member, Kana immediately straightened up, introducing the board member as Shiranui Kaya, the Chief of Defense and the official head of Valkyrie Academy. After hearing that the Rabbit Squad had been successfully captured, Chief Kaya had made a formal appearance to hear what Kana and Sensei had learned, and to bring her own news from the General Student Council. According to Kaya, the closure of SRT's Academy grounds was irreversible, meaning that there were only two options remaining for the SRT students: merge with Valkyrie or face expulsion. Sensei had spent enough time in Kivotos to know what happened to students who were expelled, having seen firsthand how difficult it was to work and live in the city without the aid of a school district. Many expelled students turned to crime out of desperation, unable to fend for themselves or pay their own bills. And with the rise of Kaiser Corporation, homeless students were now being recruited as mercenaries to fight against their former classmates. There were many things wrong with Kivotos' system of governance. Many students were woefully unprepared to lead their respective districts, and conflicts between students were often resolved through violence rather than diplomacy. However, the lack of a safety net for students who had been expelled was especially egregious, as it led to exploitation by sinister forces within the city. Sensei was baffled that the General Student Council sought to expel the Rabbit Squad. The idea of SRT joining forces with Kaiser would be a nightmare scenario for the General Student Council, but that had clearly not passed the minds of the exhausted, paranoid board members. Taking a deep breath, Sensei declared to Kaya that they had an alternate proposal. If the General Council was worried about merging SRT with Valkyrie, then Sensei would take the Rabbit Squad under the wing of Schale and would work to find a long-term solution for the SRT students. At Sensei's words, a huge, relieved smile began to spread across Kaya's face, seeing the angle that Sensei was going for. If SRT fell under the guidance of Sensei, it would be out of the control of the General Student Council to expel them. and it may also lead to a more amicable merger with Valkyrie if Sensei could convince the girls otherwise. Chief Kaya declared that Sensei had her approval to shelter the SRT students, although that would also put the responsibility of looking after the girls on the already overworked teacher. This proposal would also open up Schale to more scrutiny from the General Student Council, who could see it as a rejection of their authority, but Sensei was adamant that the Rabbit Squad should not be expelled. The teacher would do everything in their power to try and help the Rabbit Squad find a better path forward that did not involve becoming Kaiser mercenaries. After Sensei hammered out the details with Chief Kaya, the Rabbit Squad was released from Valkyrie custody into the protection of Schale. The SRT girls were still fiercely skeptical of Schale, as well as the General Council's motives for releasing them, and Miyako insisted that they would return to their encampment in Kawasagi Park, where all their belongings and camping equipment was still resting. Although Sensei wouldn't force the girls to stay at Schale, the optics of allowing the Rabbit Squad to return to Kawasagi Park was less than optimal, since they would still be living in the place of their protest. However, Arona notified the teacher that Kawasagi Park was in a largely deserted part of the capital district, and if the SRT students avoided conflict with Valkyrie, it was unlikely that most people would even notice them staying there. As Arona explained this to the teacher, Sensei began to wonder if Miyako had chosen Kawasagi Park for that exact reason. Had she made sure to stage their protest in an area away from civilians to avoid any unintended injuries? For all the blunders of their failed operation, the Rabbit Squad were a surprisingly thoughtful group. And this could work to the teacher's advantage in winning the trust of the cautious Rabbit Squad. Taking a deep breath, Sensei announced that the Rabbit Squad could continue living in Kawasagi Park, but they would need to make some concessions of their own. While the Kawasagi section of the DU was largely deserted, the Rabbit Squad would still need to be conscientious about their actions there, and they should avoid picking unnecessary fights as best as possible. Not only this, but Sensei would arrange a job for them while they spent time in the park, which would allow them to keep themselves fed in the near future. Sensei advised the Rabbit Squad to settle into their lodgings and then make their way to the ground floor of the Schale building, where their first assignment would be waiting for them. Cautiously following the teacher's advice, the Rabbit Squad repaired their damaged tents before making their way back to Schale, where they were greeted by an exuberant small girl with a bright blue work apron. Although Sensei primarily used Schale as a place to file paperwork, the building was much more than just a series of offices. On the ground level was a 24-hour convenience store called Angel 24, which was still part of the Schale building. Originally intended as a hub for students to gather food and ammunition, Angel 24 was still relatively unknown to the broader student body, only attracting occasional visitors despite its overflowing supplies. As a result, there were large amounts of food that went unclaimed before they expired, and it had been weighing on the conscience of Angel 24's main employee, Sora. for quite some time. Much to Sora's delight, Sensei had found Angel 24 the perfect bento disposal specialists who could help Sora offload her excess stock and maybe even spread the word about Angel 24's fantastic services. Sora was absolutely delighted, accepting Sensei's suggestion immediately and enthusiastically greeting the SRT girls when they arrived. Taken aback at first by Sora's exuberance, the Rabbit Squad quickly realized what was happening, and although their pride was somewhat wounded at the idea of serving as bento disposal specialists, it was a better alternative than going hungry in Kawasagi Park. The SRT girls agreed to serve as Sora's bento disposal specialists, and in return, they would have plenty of food to keep them going while they lived in Kawasagi Park. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Sensei felt grateful that the Rabbit Squad had gone along with their proposal, but it was only a temporary solution. SRT could not live in Kawasagi Park indefinitely, and although Sora was delighted to have extra help in Angel 24, having the SRT students serve as bento removal specialists was far below their pay grade. As the week passed by, the Rabbit Squad did their best to settle into a new routine, helping Sora out at Angel 24 and maintaining their gear as best as possible. But the precarity of their homelessness was beginning to wear the girls down. The Rabbit Squad had successfully retrieved barrel drums for bathing, but that was hardly a consolation for their situation, and despite their best efforts, some of the other Kawasagi locals had noticed them and had not taken kindly to the Rabbit Squad occupying the park. In particular, the non-possession cult, an eccentric group of ascetic robots led by an individual named Descartes, had already come into conflict with the Rabbit Squad in their first week. And although the girls had successfully protected their encampment, the stress of their situation was beginning to wear them down. Every day, Sensei visited the Rabbit Squad, making sure they had everything they needed before heading back to Schale to try and determine their next steps. But the situation was looking grim. As the teacher began mulling over their options, rain began pouring down on the capital of Kivotos, and with horror, Sensei realized that the monsoon season had finally arrived. The SRT girls were completely exposed in Kawasagi Park, with only tents to keep them sheltered. Throwing on their raincoat and grabbing a shovel from the crafting chamber, the teacher raced out to Kawasagi Park to help the SRT girls brave the storm. It took them some time to wade through the waters, making their way carefully and safely to Kawasagi Park, but the teacher finally reached the SRT encampment. As they neared the Rabbit Squad tents, their breath heaving in their chest, Sensei could immediately see that their worst fears were realized. The SRT tents that had stood tall just hours before were now slumped, the weight of the rain tearing through them. Moe, Miyu, Saki, and Miyako were standing in front of their destroyed camp, their shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Even from this distance, Sensei could make out the shaking shoulders of Miyu as she sobbed. However, Before Sensei could get any closer, Miyako snatched up a shovel, gripping it firmly in her shaking hands, and began digging around the encampment. With a growing realization, Sensei could see that Miyako had already built a substantial amount of a spillway, even if she hadn't made it in time to stop the worst of the flooding. But despite the destruction of their camp, Miyako hadn't given up hope on saving the rest of their supplies. Gripping their own shovel more tightly, Sensei hurried over to Miyako to start helping her dig around the encampment. It wouldn't bring back the supplies that they'd already lost, but it was important to preserve whatever they still had left, and to make sure that they'd have a place to set up a new camp once the rain finally stopped. As Sensei started digging the trench beside Miyako, the white-haired girl looked up at the teacher in surprise, water streaming from her face and spilling onto the ground below. Despite everything that SRT had done to protest the merger with Valkyrie, and their insistence on remaining in this park against their own best interest, Sensei had not abandoned them to their fate, and the Halo-less teacher was risking their own safety to make sure that the girls could save whatever was still left of their camp. One by one, Saki, Moe, and Miyu joined Sensei and Miyako, all thoughts of disagreements or arguments from the past completely disappearing as everyone gathered together to dig a spillway around the camp. Throughout the rest of the evening, the group worked tirelessly to drive water away from the park and salvage whatever they could of their remaining belongings. Once the rain had finally stopped, Sensei and Miyako took stock of their situation, the two working together in unison for the first time. The storm may have destroyed many of the Rabbit Squad's belongings, but it had strengthened the group's trust in each other. The spillway had been properly created, and after making sure that the girls had all the provisions they needed to make it through the rest of the night, Sensei made the trek back to Schale, where they promptly collapsed into bed. It had been an exhausting day, and Sensei was no closer to a solution for SRT than when they'd started. Rin had mercifully agreed to correct the teacher's paperwork as a thank you for assisting Valkyrie, but that was a small consolation for what still lay ahead. As the teacher settled into bed for the night, they were certain that their stressful nightmares would almost certainly return again. But even if they found a dreamlike specter pointing a gun at their chest once again, at least the teacher would finally be getting some sleep. Meanwhile, at the center of the capital district, Peace Bureau Director Kana was having an urgent meeting with Chief Kaya of the Defense Office. Recently, Chief Kaya had tasked Kana with a difficult new mission. Kousagi Park and the surrounding area had been selected for reconstruction by the General Student Council. Long before the Rabbit Squad had ever staged a protest there, the reconstruction of Kousagi Town had been set into motion. This section of the DU had been languishing for years, and many of the residents had left this part of the district as a result. But the planned reconstruction was not going well. the General Student Council had contracted Kaiser Construction to remodel the area into a shopping center. And although Kaiser had been aggressively buying out shop owners and homes in order to make way for the reconstruction, there were still some stubborn residents who refused to leave. And Chief Kaya had asked Kana to find some solution to get those residents out. The reconstruction of Kousagi Park had already cost the General Student Council a considerable amount of money. If Kana could not achieve this task, then Chief Kaya was more than happy to replace her. The best and quickest way to relocate the residents of Kousagi would be through force. However, the fact still remained that Valkyrie's budget had been painfully thin. Valkyrie could barely afford ammunition, much less a contract for more mercenaries to join them. As the thought crossed Kana's mind, she suddenly realized that the solution was right in front of her. Kaiser Corporation were the ones contracted for Kousagi Park's redevelopment, but they were also a formidable force in the world of arms manufacturing. If Kana played her cards right, she may be able to strike a deal with Kaiser Corporation, one that would benefit both Valkyrie and the Kaiser redevelopment project. Kana needed to convince Kaiser that it was within their best interest to provide weapons to Valkyrie, which would allow the police school to finally have the manpower they needed to fulfill Chief Kaya's task and resume the scheduled reconstruction of Kousagi Park. Feeling her resolve growing, Kana bid farewell to Chief Kaya, leaving her office to head out of the Sanctum Tower. Unbeknownst to Kana, however, her every move was watched, carefully noting where she was going and what she was planning to do. Several days passed, and Sensei was once again hurrying to Kousagi Park. Despite the rainy last few days, the sky today was clear of clouds, and as the teacher made their way to the park, they caught the scent of sweet, salty fried food nearby. Despite how abandoned this neighborhood was, someone was cooking inari sushi, which Sensei realized would make for the perfect celebratory lunch after the Rabbit Squad's hard work saving their camp. Sensei spotted a pink-haired student running an inari sushi stall nearby, her large, fox-like ears perking up as the teacher approached the stall. Without hesitation, the fox-eared girl began excitedly dishing out inari sushi to the teacher, chatting with them about the good weather. It was odd. The teacher had never met this student before, but she radiated such genuine kindness, almost as if she was trying to reassure the teacher that everything was going to be okay. As the teacher's shoulders began to subconsciously relax, the fox-eared girl began commenting on how deserted Kousagi was, and leaned towards the teacher with a serious look on her face. She told the teacher a rumor that she'd heard, that a new subway station and shopping center was going to be built in Kousagi Park, and that a big construction company was behind it, one that had a big octopus logo associated with it. The comforting feeling in Sensei's chest dissipated immediately as recognition and horror began to take its place. Was this girl saying that Kaiser Corporation was trying to redevelop Kosagi Park? Although the corporation's PMC had been briefly crippled in Abydos, they still had a sizable outpost in the sandy dunes, as well as numerous offices throughout the city itself. And if they were somehow involved here, then that would explain how Kosagi had become a ghost town. The Kaiser Corporation had a long history of buying out property owners, but Sensei had not realized that the corporation's reach had extended into the capital of Kivotos itself. Even more concerning, if this was anything like Abydos, then Kaiser would start hiring mercenaries to clear out the remaining stubborn residents, just like they had tried to do with the foreclosure task force. If that was the case, this meant that the Rabbit Squad and the remaining Kosagi residents were in more danger than the teacher had previously realized. As the teacher stewed on this new information, the fox-eared girl smiled at them. She handed over the remaining inarizushi, piling them into Sensei's surprised arms, and packed up her stall with frightening efficiency. Just as quickly as she had appeared, the fox-eared student was gone, leaving Sensei with a mountain of inarizushi and a swirling mess of thoughts. It was too much of a coincidence. The teacher had never met this student before, but they knew exactly who the teacher was, as well as where and when they would be making their way to Kosagi Park. But the teacher had not detected any malice in the girl's actions. On the contrary, the encounter had given Sensei valuable information that would have been hidden from them otherwise. The girl's uniform had been strange. It almost reminded the teacher of the Rabbit Squad, but with a slightly different design and look. Had Sensei just met a member of the Fox Squad? The Fox Squad had undoubtedly attacked the General Student Council, but why had one of them assisted the teacher? The information she had provided was given freely, without any malice or any distrust. But what did that mean? Were all the Fox Squad members watching from the shadows, looking to help the Rabbit Squad members where they could? Or was this a rogue member trying to help Sensei and her underclassmen in the only way that she could? The teacher didn't have enough information to make a full assessment, but what they did know was that this was an unexpected opportunity that they could not squander. Picking up their pace, Sensei hurried to the center of Kosagi Park to host a strategy meeting with the rest of the Rabbit Squad. While the Rabbit Squad excitedly devoured the inarizushi, Sensei briefed them on their latest discoveries, leaving out their suspicions about who had given them this information, just in case her identity needed to be protected. Much to the teacher's surprise, however, the Rabbit Squad had found additional information that backed up what Sensei had learned. After taking stock of what ammunition had been damaged, Moe had made some calls to her old contacts at Kaiser Corporation. Much to the surprise and horror of her fellow SRT members, Moe was such a frequent customer of Kaiser's that she was considered a VIP client. But despite her lofty status, Moe had been unable to procure new weapons or ammunition. as they had all been acquired by a mysterious client. Sensei resolved to talk with Moe later about risk management. Right now, this new information confirmed that someone had been working with Kaiser, but this was not the only new information that the SRT girls had gathered. Over the last few days, Miyu and Saki had noticed that the Valkyrie patrols had become even more frequent in the area. Even more recently, the Valkyrie Peace Bureau, the interrogators and anti-terrorism unit of the police school, had been seen with state-of-the-art weaponry. Valkyrie's Peace Bureau had started using their new firepower to drive out the other homeless residents of Kousagi, and Miyako was trying to determine what steps they would take next to try and keep the citizens safe. Just as the teacher had suspected, Kaiser was having trouble evicting the last remaining residents of Kousagi, and the company was hiring muscle to do their dirty work. What the teacher had not expected was that Kaiser's new muscle was apparently the Valkyrie Peace Bureau. This came as quite the surprise to the teacher. Had Director Kana sold out the Peace Bureau to Kaiser? The Valkyrie Police School didn't have the funds to purchase their new weapons, so Kana would have needed to agree to work for Kaiser in exchange for weaponry. And if this was true, this was blatant corruption. Even if the redevelopment of Kousagi had been approved by the General Council, Kana and the Peace Bureau were working as Kaiser's proxies to illegally evict residents. At this point, everything was still speculation. They would need more hard evidence to convince the General Student Council to act. Privately, the teacher was surprised that the General Council had even contracted Kaiser for this redevelopment. Perhaps the company's corrupt dealings were only known outside the capital, but either way, the teacher was prepared to face the corporation once again. As Sensei tried to figure out what they should do next, Miyako had gone completely silent, closing her eyes as she considered their options. SRT would have been the ones to investigate Valkyrie's activities, but SRT had been dissolved, and all that was left now were a bunch of homeless Rabbit Squad members. However, even though the residents of Kousagi had come into conflict with the Rabbit Squad, they were still innocent civilians, and Miyako couldn't stand by while they were forcibly evicted by Valkyrie. If Sensei's hunch was correct, then Kaiser was trying to wriggle their way into the highest offices of Kivotos. Taking on Valkyrie and Kaiser would be a dangerous proposition at the best of times, and the Rabbit Squad was considerably under-equipped as it currently stood. But unless something was done, the Peace Bureau would continue evicting Kousagi's residents, and Kaiser would get an even greater foothold in the capital. Miyako announced that they had to do something. Even if they had almost nothing left, who else would be able to take on Valkyrie and expose the truth? As Miyako finished speaking, she found herself subconsciously looking to Sensei, almost as if she was waiting for approval for what they should do next. This was, after all, a tremendously risky operation that she would be proposing. They would need to infiltrate Valkyrie in order to get the evidence to prove their connection to Kaiser, and if the teacher didn't agree to this, then they would be losing an important leader in this operation. Sensing Miyako's trepidation, Sensei rose to their feet and announced that the Rabbit Squad had their permission to infiltrate Valkyrie's main office. The teacher would take responsibility for any blowback from the Rabbit Squad's actions. Following Miyako's tactical lead, the Rabbit Squad would infiltrate Valkyrie's main office and search for documents linking Kaiser to the Sanctum Tower's largest police force. Together with the Rabbit Squad, Sensei and Miyako laid out their plan. Valkyrie's main building was guarded by a high-tech Millennium security system, but if Moe could briefly override it, then that would give the rest of the Rabbit Squad a short amount of time to find the records inside. Much to the teacher's surprise, Moe had a spectacular talent for hacking and espionage, so Moe's bombs would be stashed away in favor of her hacking skills. Once Moe had gained control of Valkyrie's security system, they would have a half an hour to find the records proving Valkyrie's corrupt connection with Kaiser. According to their intel, all the records for Valkyrie's transactions were stored in a vault 3 stories underground in the Valkyrie main facility. Strapping on her helmet, Miyako turned to Saki, Miyu, and Moe to make their final preparations. Much to Miyako's surprise, Moe was already excitedly gearing up for their mission, ready to begin her infiltration on Miyako's command. Meanwhile, Saki was also ready to move out, looking to Miyako for further instructions. Although Saki, Moe, and Miyako had bumped heads only recently, the last few weeks living and working together in Kousagi Park had brought them all closer together, and for the first time, they were actually feeling like a real SRT squad. Miyu was even less nervous than usual, returning Miyako's gaze with an uncharacteristic conviction. Grabbing her own submachine gun, Miyako took a deep breath and gave the orders for the Rabbit Squad to begin Operation Clover. With almost frightening speed, Moe successfully took over the building's security system, making it so that Miyako, Saki, and Miyu could infiltrate the records department without being seen for 30 minutes. Sensei would remain behind with Moe, coaching them over the radio if necessary, but ultimately deferring to Miyako's judgment. As they arrived at the Valkyrie facility, Miyako was surprised that there were no Valkyrie guards stationed throughout the building. Although Valkyrie's security system was designed by Veritas's Vice President Chihiro, the police school relied on it so much that they hadn't bothered instituting regular patrols through their own campus. Miyako wasn't the only one who had noticed this. As they made their way through the dark Valkyrie hallways, Saki clicked her tongue in annoyance at the school's lax approach to security, but the group was otherwise silent as they made their way down 3 flights of stairs to the vault below. On the 3rd basement floor, the main records vault soon loomed before them. The door to the vault was adorned with a hefty locking system, which could only be accessed by Valkyrie's officers, or Moe's decryption key, which Miyako pulled out and began using to unlock the massive vault door. However, the decryption process was painfully slow, and before Miyako knew it, 3 entire minutes had passed before the vault door softly clicked open. Without wasting any more time, the Rabbit Squad hurried inside, splitting up to search whatever documents they could in the time that was still remaining. Miyako tried to calm her rising pulse as she searched through Valkyrie's receipts and documentation. They had already used a third of their allotted 30 minutes just getting into this vault, which gave them less than 10 minutes to search before they needed to retreat from the building again. Her heart almost stopped when she heard a gasp from nearby. But to her relief, Miyako saw Saki excitedly waving a document in her direction. Hurrying over to Saki, Miyako carefully reviewed the paper and felt vindication rushing through her veins. The document that Saki had found was dated from 1 week earlier, and it was a receipt from Kaiser Corporation for Valkyrie's Peace Bureau. In undeniable wording, it detailed how Kaiser Industries would provide free weapons to the Peace Bureau in exchange for evicting Kowasagi's population. It was exactly what they had been looking for, and now that Saki had found it, it was time to escape before Valkyrie's security systems came back online. Turning to the others, Miyako started giving hushed instructions for their retreat, until she saw that the vault door, which had been open only a few minutes prior, was sealed shut. Miyu was frantically pushing at the door, trying to shift it open with her body weight, but the door would not budge whatsoever. With growing fear, Miyako recognized what had occurred. Miyu was an excellent sniper, one of the best in the entire city, but she was always positioned outside during their missions, using rooftops and trees for cover. That meant that Miyu was unfamiliar with indoor combat and had not realized that she should not close the vault door behind them. As Saki and Miyu both began to panic, it became clear that trying to open this door from the inside would be a failed endeavor. The door was not meant to be closed from the inside. This was a highly secure area, and so the vault door worked only one way. Miyako was unable to keep her fear contained any longer, feeling the weight of self-doubt and failure washing over her. Miyako should have known that Miyu wasn't familiar with indoor combat. That was a rookie mistake. She should have walked Miyu through all the proper protocols, but in Miyako's haste, she hadn't even considered that as a possibility. Miyako was supposed to be their leader, but everything she'd led had resulted in failure. Under her guidance, the Rabbit Squad had launched their resistance against the General Student Council, but they'd been defeated by Valkyrie's civilian-facing public safety office. When they'd tried to continue their resistance, they'd been unable to fend for themselves without Sensei's assistance, helping Sora and Angel 24 in exchange for bentos that were about to expire. Rain had damaged most of their belongings, and now, at the end of it all, they would be captured by Valkyrie for raiding a top-secret records vault, resulting in their expulsion. Angry tears were welling up in Miyako's eyes as her thoughts swirled. It was too much for her to handle. If she was a better leader, like Yukino from the Fox Squad, or even Sensei, then she would never have caused her teammates so much pain and suffering. Miyako! Sensei's voice crackled in her ear, causing the girl to jump. Her thoughts of self-doubt were still swirling, but Sensei's voice had managed to stop her catastrophic spiral for just a brief moment. Miyako, it's okay. You don't have to do this alone. Look to the squad members. who have always put their trust in you." Blinking away her tears, Miyako stared up at Miyu and Saki. Although they hadn't always listened to her orders, and they had argued more times than she could count, during their time in Kousagi Park, they had come to trust Miyako's leadership, but she had come to rely on them just as much. Feeling a moment of inspiration, Miyako wiped away her thoughts of inadequacy, seeing that now was not the time for her to break down. They still had a mission to do, and she was going to get them out of here. They might not be as experienced as the Fox Squad, but the Rabbit Squad was more than capable of escaping this situation together. If they couldn't open the vault from the inside, then they just needed to lure someone from the outside to open it for them. As soon as 30 minutes had officially passed, alarms began blaring in Valkyrie's third basement floor. According to the Veritas security system, the records vault had detected intruders, but nothing had been detected on the security cameras. Perhaps a rat had made its way into the records vault and tripped the alarm. Several Valkyrie officers nonchalantly made their way downstairs, unlocking the vault doors to investigate what rodent had made its way inside. However, as soon as the Valkyrie officers opened the vault door, they were knocked to the ground with a barrage of bullets and a well-timed explosive. Miyako, Miyu, and Saki burst from the vault and began running up the stairs out of the building. Just as Miyako had predicted, if they tripped the alarm on purpose, Valkyrie officers would come down to investigate, and they would be blissfully unaware of the Rabbit Squad waiting for them to open the door. However, the Rabbit Squad was low on ammunition after their camp had been decimated by the rains. Their mission now was to escape the Valkyrie office as quickly as possible and rendezvous with Moe and Sensei to pass along the documents. Alarms were now beginning to blare throughout the entire building, and Miyako could hear footsteps of officers hurrying towards them. Running through some quick mental calculations, Miyako figured they could afford to engage in 2, maybe 3 full firefights before they were completely out of ammo, so they'd need to rely on their speed and quick thinking to get out of here in one piece. Under Miyako's instructions, Moe had performed one last hacking maneuver on the security system, tricking the temperature sensors to think it was 900 degrees Celsius inside. As the Rabbit Squad reached the first floor, the building's sprinklers had begun rapidly deploying, spraying a constant stream of water throughout the hallway. In one fluid motion, Miyako, Saki, and Miyu flew through the hallway, firing strategically at Valkyrie officers who tried to block their path. Saki's excellent aim quickly picked off the centermost officers, whereas Miyu was already firing at Valkyrie students further down the hall to ensure that they had a clear path through the building. As the Rabbit Squad raced up the stairs towards the rooftop, Miyako had one last trick up her sleeve. Carefully placing a lithium battery into a stick of C4, Miyako planted a makeshift bomb on the stairwell and raced up the stairs after Saki and Miyu. It was a crude makeshift bomb, born from a lack of ammunition and other alternatives, but it served its purpose perfectly. In an instant, the lithium ignited from the sprinkling water above, setting off the C4 and bringing down the hallway behind them. It would take several minutes for the Valkyrie officers to dig through the rubble and chase after them, which should give the Rabbit Squad just enough time to make it to Valkyrie's rooftop and escape. At the top of the stairs, Miyu and Saki were already preparing barricades, and once Miyako had made it through the door, the girls blocked the entryway to make it more difficult for Valkyrie to reach them. It would take several more minutes for Moe and Sensei to reach them by helicopter, but the crude bomb and the barricades should buy them more than enough time to escape. However, as the thought passed through Miyako's mind, a strange creaking noise filled the air around them. Miyako froze, trying to determine where the sound was coming from. It was metallic in nature, almost like someone was climbing up a metal pipe or a storm drain. Miyako spun around to the edge of the rooftop, where a familiar face had just crawled up to their location. The head of the Valkyrie Peace Bureau and the fabled feral hound of Valkyrie, Ogata Kana, had just climbed 10 stories to reach their location, using the building's storm drains to guide her to the rooftop. Most frightening of all, Kana barely looked out of breath. Her sharp teeth were gritted into a menacing frown, and she raised her weapon towards the rabbit squad. Miyako fought her instinct to step backward. The rabbit squad had used up all their remaining ammo to escape the building, as they had reasonably assumed that no student could scale 10 stories of storm drains to reach their location. And yet, there she was, the head of the Peace Bureau, who had signed off on the Kaiser Corporation deal and stood to lose the most from this deal coming to light. At this point, a fight was looking inevitable, and although the Rabbit Squad were excellent combatants, they would stand no chance against Kana's raw physical strength without more ammunition. The only chance they had at escaping this was to distract Kana for just long enough until Moe and Sensei arrived with the helicopter. Miyako took a cautious step forward and began speaking. Director Kana, you pretend to protect the people, to apprehend criminals at all costs. But how can you say that when you've committed a felony of the highest order? You've been accepting illegal bribes from Kaiser in exchange for evicting Kosagi. Your actions are a slap in the face of the justice that the Valkyrie Police School supposedly claims. Miyako's heart felt like it was going to beat out of her chest. This was a risky gamble to directly antagonize Kana for her actions and distract her as a result. In the worst-case scenario, these words could provoke Kana into attacking them, which would be utterly counterproductive. But Miyako hoped that Kana would try to justify her actions, to fight back at Miyako with words instead of fists. As Miyako kept her gaze on Kana, the dog-eared director stayed silent for a few painful moments before sighing in frustration. Sure, Valkyrie serves the public and should act accordingly. But guess what? The world isn't made of rainbows and butterflies. Kana's face began to twist as she spoke, desperation filling her eyes. Do you think this is what I want? You think I like being the bad guy? Ideals don't serve justice. Actions do, no matter what you have to do along the way. Taking a quick breath, Miyako could see that her plan was working. Despite everything, Kana felt shame for her actions, and the weight of that shame was beginning to suffocate her. As Miyako opened her mouth to respond, she was startled as the radio on her hip began to buzz, and Sensei's voice crackled through SRT's communication devices.
Those are all excuses, Kana.
Everyone on the rooftop froze, realizing that Sensei had been listening in to the entire conversation, and the teacher was about to give Kana a firm lecture.
The ends never justify the means, Kana. Beliefs mean nothing if you abandon them at the first hardship. Doing the right thing is never easy, but that's a decision you have to make for yourself.
Miyako's words had exposed Kana's shame, but Sensei's lecture had utterly shattered her defenses. The Peace Bureau director looked like she wanted to say something, to defend herself in response. But as she began to process the words from Sensei and Miyako, despair began to take the place of anger. As the Peace Bureau director looked down to the ground, the sound of a helicopter filled the air around them. It was time for Operation Clover to come to its triumphant close. Looking up, Miyako saw Sensei tossing down a ladder to the rabbit squad as Moe kept the helicopter steady. Miyu and Saki immediately scrambled up the ladder, and as Miyako followed them, she locked eyes briefly with Peace Bureau Director Kana one last time. In a different reality, Kana could have been such a fierce ally. She was powerful and determined and a well-respected leader, and she could have been an amazing ally, standing alongside Schale and SRT as they tried to keep Kivotos accountable and safe. But that was not the future that they had been given. As Miyako climbed up the rope to the helicopter, she gave one last sad smile to Kana before the Rabbit Squad and Sensei made their escape from the Valkyrie headquarters, and Operation Clover officially came to a close. It only took a few hours for the news to spread all over Kivotos. The Valkyrie Peace Bureau, the Interrogators, and the Anti-Terrorism Unit of the Sanctum Tower Police School had been illegally accepting bribes from Kaiser Corporation, accepting weapons in exchange for driving out Kousagi Park. The Kronos School of Journalism had received an anonymous tip from Sensei, and reporters Shinon and Mai had jumped on the scandalous story. Because the Rabbit Squad had technically raided Valkyrie illegally, their involvement was left out of Sensei's anonymous tip. However, the SRT girls were more than happy with the outcome, as the truth of Valkyrie's corruption had been exposed. And now the Sanctum Tower could start moving forward with an official investigation. They would be determining the Peace Bureau's future as quickly as possible. Much to everyone's surprise, Kaiser Corporation had also announced its withdrawal from the Redevelopment project. Perhaps the public optics were too bad for Kaiser, leading them to withdraw from the project, but Sensei still had some skepticism that the corporation was truly out of the picture now. However, as soon as Kaiser announced their withdrawal from Kousagi Park, the remaining residents swarmed the Rabbit Squad's encampment, thanking them for their intervention, even though the Rabbit Squad's involvement had not been made public. the Kousagi residents had put together the pieces, and the SRT girls were soon swarmed with requests from Kousagi citizens who wanted to hire them for odd jobs around the district, just to thank them for what they had done. As Sensei sat with the girls in the park, eating some soup that they had brought to celebrate, the rabbit squad was filled with smiling faces, feeling that their fortunes were maybe beginning to turn. Although there were still dark clouds over the horizon, as the General Student Council would need to reckon with Valkyrie's crimes, for now, the teacher was relieved to see that the rabbit squad's hard work had finally paid off. Kaiser Industries had bided their time for many, many years, patiently buying out land throughout Kivotos, trying to find the weapons that would allow them to compete with and eventually surpass the haloed students of this city. Although it was a tragedy to leave Kousagi after everything the company had invested there, the corporation was not short-sighted and could see it was more advantageous to retreat, at least for now. However, as luck would have it, leaving Kousagi Park was an easy proposition, as Kaiser's hard work in Abydos had finally produced results. In the sandy wastes of Abydos, far away from any sign of civilization, the soldiers of Kaiser PMC had just made a momentous discovery. The CEO of Kaiser PMC had been forced into hiding by the foreclosure task force, but he was a small fish in the ocean of Kaiser's corporate ladder. The highest-ranking Kaiser official, the corporation's president, had stayed out of the limelight, carefully planning construction and demolition projects throughout the city in search of ancient Kivotos artifacts, and the soldiers in Abydos had just made a breakthrough. For many years, Kaiser had been digging in the desolate Abydos sands, fighting off attacks from the Decagrammaton prophet Bina and the prying eyes of Kivotos' intelligence networks, all in search of a theoretical artifact that would grant them the power to stand at the top of Kivotos' political stage. It had taken unfathomable resources just to unearth the thing. But against all odds, Kaiser Corporation had finally done it. The powerful Abydos artifact, which had been described by Black Suit as a weapon beyond all comprehension, was finally within their grasp. And it was enormous. Measuring 132 meters long, the artifact was frankly monstrous in size, but there was still one problem. Despite Kaiser's best attempts, the artifact had refused to power on, meaning that they would need to force it to activate with a tremendously large amount of energy. Thinking about his options, the Kaiser president leaned back in his chair and called up his contact within the General Student Council. This artifact would need a tremendous energy source just to power on, and the Kaiser president knew just where to find such a source of energy. The most powerful hub of energy in the entire city, the building known as the Sanctum Tower. Far away from the Abydos district, within the confines of the Schale office, the exhaustion of the last few weeks was finally catching up to Sensei. It had been a tremendous amount of work looking after the SRT girls and exposing Valkyrie's connection to Kaiser, but they had still been victorious. And now, Sensei was going to get some well-earned rest as their reward. As the teacher drifted off to sleep, their consciousness fading into dreams, they were struck by an odd sensation. It almost felt like rain dripping onto their face. In fact, the more the teacher thought about it, they were being hit by raindrops. They could hear the water bouncing off the ground around them, reverberating through the air in a rhythmic pattern. Confused, the teacher opened their eyes to a gray sky, feeling the weight of the rain falling down on them from above. Was this a dream? It was more realistic than Sensei had ever seen before. The rain felt so real, like it was actually falling on their face. As Sensei began taking in the scene around them, the teacher froze, suddenly recognizing that they were not alone. Standing just a meter away from them was a shadowy figure, pointing an all too familiar gun directly at the teacher's chest. Sensei realized that they were seeing the same dream that they had witnessed before, but this time everything was completely in focus, and they could finally see the figure standing before them. Although her form was drenched from the rain, the figure's long gray hair fell in waves down her back, contrasting sharply with the black dress that billowed out into the wind. But as the teacher's gaze continued to pan upwards, they began to recognize the assault rifle slung over the girl's shoulder and anxiously looked up to meet the girl's eyes. The halo above her head was jet black, with strange cracks that Sensei had never seen before. Her face was shadowed, but the figure's unmistakable wolf-like ears was paired with a matching set of blue hairpins. And as Sensei locked eyes with the figure's blue gaze, they realized that they knew this person. She was older, and her halo had cracked and distorted, but this figure was unmistakably Shiroko, and she was pointing a pistol directly at Sensei. The teacher's blood ran cold. This dream was too real. It was like it was really happening. What had happened to Shiroko? Why was she pointing a gun at Sensei? The teacher had only been shot once before, and it was only because Arona had exhausted her protective powers, shielding the teacher from a missile strike. As the thought crossed the teacher's mind, Sensei instinctively grasped for the Shatim chest, but the tablet was not in their satchel. Looking around frantically, Sensei tried to see where Arona and the artifact were, and that was when they spotted it, glinting in the dim light nearby, with rainwater bouncing off of its form. was the shattered remains of the Shatim chest. 3 bullet holes had pierced its screen, shattering the tablet in large, violent cracks upon the ground. The display was completely black, with no sign of Arona within it. Before the teacher could make a sound, they heard Shiroko pull the trigger, and the entire world went black. Sensei sprang out of bed, their lungs screaming for air as they yelled aloud. On the table beside them, Arona had already booted up, hearing the teacher crying out as they woke from the dream. It took Sensei a few moments to process that they were awake, standing in the darkened bedroom of Schale, but the vision of Shiroko refused to leave their thoughts. After Arona reassured them over and over that everything was okay and that the Shatim chest did not have any bullet holes in it, Sensei sent an urgent message to Shiroko. It was still the late hours of the night, but Sensei sent a message asking if everything was okay and if Shiroko had experienced anything out of the ordinary. Much to the teacher's relief, the Abydos student responded back almost immediately, reassuring the teacher that everything was fine and asking if they wanted to join her for a morning bike ride. Feeling their pulse begin to slow, Sensei collapsed back to the bed, resting their head against the wall as they stared up at the ceiling. Shiroko and Arona were completely safe. Whatever the teacher had seen in their dream had not happened in real life, but it felt like they had just seen a vision of some future that could still come to pass. A vision? The teacher had only known one other person who could see visions of the future, and there was a chance that Sensei could get some help in deciphering their dream. Pulling out their phone, Sensei sent a message to the Tea Party president and former prophet of Trinity, Yurizono Seiya. When Seiya saw the message from Sensei, she could not believe her eyes. Although her powers of prophecy had been taken away, Seiya had just awoken from the same horribly frightful dream, one where she had witnessed an older Shiroko shoot and kill the haloless teacher. Sensei had entered Seiya's dreams before, when she had been unconscious during the events of the Eden Treaty, but Seiya had never expected to see a vision from them again, much less one that was so deeply troubling. Truthfully, Seiya was surprised she could even still see a vision like this. During the fight with Beatrice in the Arius Basilica, Seiya had become tangled in a mental web, her mind slowly picked away by the frightful being that Beatrice had called Color. It was only through the aid of the mysterious Hyakyako girl that Seiya had escaped unscathed, but her escape had come at a steep price. In order to escape the grasp of Color, Seiya had needed to give up her abilities of foresight. And as a result, she had expected to never see visions ever again. Thinking of that moment now, Seiya recalled that the Hyakyako girl, Kuzunoha, had referred to Color by a different name, the Chroma. Kuzunoha had described the Chroma as an incomprehensible force that lurked outside of Kivotos, and that it had the power to corrupt the halos and the spirits of those that it touched. According to Kuzunoha, Seiya had been lucky that Beatrice had not summoned the chroma's full form. The ritual had been interrupted, and therefore only drew the chroma's gaze for a brief moment before the entity moved onwards. If the chroma had been summoned to Kivotos, it would have spelled disaster for the city. Any Kivotos resident who came into contact with it would become distorted, their bodies and spirits changing into new forms. But Kuzunoha had reassured Seiya that all was well, and that the chroma would not find Kivotos after the ritual was disrupted. However, now, in the current moment, Seiya was beginning to doubt those words. Kuzunoha was clearly a powerful entity, but that did not make her infallible. Seiya had already seen that her prophetic powers had somewhat remained, as she was still seeing fragmented visions just like this one, and was even experiencing momentary sensations when something was about to go wrong. After hearing that both she and Sensei had experienced the same vision, Seiya was beginning to wonder if the chroma really would ignore Kivotos after all. According to Sensei, the current Shiroko was completely safe and unchanged by sinister forces, but that did not mean they were safe yet. If anything, this just confirmed Seiya's own fears, particularly about the very last vision she had seen before her fight with Beatrice. Seiya's last full vision, before giving up her prior foresight, had shown 6 enormous pillars descending from the sky, painting the world red. As the pillars scattered throughout Kivotos, the world was distorted and changed until the destruction of Kivotos came to pass. Although this new vision of Shiroko was a first for Seiya, it was one of many for Sensei, and this vision was the most clear one yet. All the pieces pointed towards the chroma descending on Kivotos and spelling the end for life in the Academies city. But that hadn't happened yet. There was still time to save everyone. Seiya may have fallen into despair at visions of destruction before, but Sensei had helped her see that the future was never set in stone. This vision was still only a possible future, and now that they had seen what may lie ahead, it was time to start preventing that future from coming to pass. As the sun began to rise over the capital of Kivotos, tensions were running high in the Sanctum Tower. The corruption exposed in Valkyrie had thrown the General Council into turmoil. Not only had their largest police force been compromised, but the general public was deeply skeptical that the General Council was even capable of running Kivotos' highest office. Acting President Rin had done her best to maintain the stability of the Sanctum Tower, but even she could see the looks of suspicion and distrust that were sent her way. It was bad enough that she had needed to disband SRT, but now the General Council looked even more incompetent in the face of Valkyrie's corruption. As if all this wasn't enough, in the early hours of the morning, Rin had been informed that Sensei and the Prophet of Trinity had experienced terrible visions. The destruction of Kivotos at the hands of an entity called the Chroma. Rin had been aware that Seiya could see prophetic visions, but this was the first time that she'd heard that Sensei was able to see visions as well. As she mulled over the information that she had been given, Rin sank back into her chair, taking off her glasses as she rubbed her eyes. She was already dealing with the fallout from Valkyrie's corruption, and now the entirety of Kivotos may be in danger? Even if Rin believed Sensei and Seiya, it would be another matter to convince the rest of the General Council. As things currently stood, most of Rin's supporters were in the hospital after the Fox Squad attack, and most of the board members that remained were not friendly to Rin's governance. In particular, the Chief of Finance, Oki Aoi, was openly antagonistic to Rin at every opportunity, always accusing Rin of overstepping the president's authority with every action she took. No matter what Rin did, she was always walking in the missing president's shadow, painfully aware that she did not carry the same charisma and wit that inspired trust in the General Council. It was a position that Rin had never wanted to be in. She had served as the chief of the supervisory office, the second in command to the presidency, and Rin had always been content as the president's number 2. After all, the president was her good friend, an annoyingly friendly and charming person, the type of person who could get away with calling her Rinny instead of Rin. But the president had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a note behind requesting the implementation of Schale. And as Rin stepped in to fill the president's shoes, scrutiny and suspicion followed her every step. The decision to create Schale and to disband SRT had been met with fierce resistance, both from the uninjured board members and from the SRT students themselves. And now, every action Rin took was perceived as an attempt to solidify her position as president. Rin took a deep breath and sat back up, picking up her glasses from the desk and carefully wiping off the lenses. It was a silly thing, but Rin could see perfectly well without her glasses. They were part of her image, meant to communicate her competence as an administrator, and now as the leader of the Sanctum Tower. In a strange way, they'd become a security blanket of sorts, their way to help Rin maintain her composure despite everything that was thrown at her. And she'd need whatever mental support she could as she tackled this latest problem. If what Sensei and Seiya had seen was real, then Rin would need to be prepared to take action at any time to prevent complete catastrophe. Rin began to dial her only allies within the General Council, Transportation Chief Momoka and her secretary Ayumu, only for Ayumu to suddenly burst into her office. Ayumu looked concerned, and she started relaying that Momoka had picked up unusual readings above Kivotos, 6 strange masses of high energy, slowly growing above the Academy city. However, despite Momoka's best attempts, there was nothing showing up on the visual scans, which had led Momoka and Ayumu to believe that something was wrong with their detection software. It would be expensive to repair, but if Rin approved the funding, they could get to work right away to figure out why the Sanctum Tower was detecting invisible masses. Before she could help herself, Rin had shot up from her desk, startling her secretary. She couldn't believe how quickly it was all happening. The readings that Momoka had found matched the description from Sensei and Seiya to a frightening degree. And that meant that they had even less time than she had thought to avert complete catastrophe. Ayumu, please gather representatives from Kivotos' various Academy student councils. Rin stated aloud. I'm calling for an emergency response committee. Rin knew it was a risky move. Calling for an emergency response committee was only used in the direst of circumstances, as it was the equivalent of demanding that the Kivotos student councils listen to the will of the Sanctum Tower. The Sanctum Tower's reputation had never been great with the individual academies, but over the last few months, suspicion and unease had continued to grow, and it was entirely likely that some academies would disregard Rin's pleas for help. Most nerve-wracking, however, was that such a move would put Rin in an even worse position with the rest of the General Council. Chief Aoi had made it clear that if Rin overstepped her authority again, then the Board of Administration officers would move to censure her and strip Rin of her position. Convening an emergency response committee could be perceived as stepping on the Chief of Defense's authority, which was the last thing that Rin wanted to be doing right now. However, Rin saw this as a necessary risk. Aoi was distrustful of her, but Rin was certain that Chief Aoi was not foolish enough to risk the safety of Kivotos just to remove Rin as acting president. The academies and the board members may view Rin with suspicion, but removing her as president right before a crisis was about to unfold would send the city into chaos. Rin was startled from her thoughts by the arrival of Chief Kaya, of all people, who had apparently overheard Rin's calls for an emergency committee. Hostility radiated from Kaya's form, and Rin instinctively went on the defensive, apologizing for convening an emergency committee without Kaya's approval. However, to the acting president's surprise, Kaya reassured Rin that all was well, and she was merely here to offer a suggestion. If Rin was concerned about the Academy's disregarding the Sanctum Tower's summons, perhaps they could invite Sensei as a moderator. It would help to soothe the tensions between the General Council and the schools, and would also serve as a way for Sensei to voice their own opinions during the meeting. It was an excellent suggestion. Rin wondered if she'd misinterpreted Kaya's concern as hostility. Truthfully, it was hard to read the Chief of Defense at times, as her smile was a perpetual feature of her demeanor. All things considered, Chief Kaya had made an excellent suggestion. Schale may be a newer player on the Kivotos political stage, which meant they wouldn't normally have been summoned to an emergency response committee, but Sensei was just as worthy of attending the committee as the other academies, and Rin would deeply appreciate the insight that the teacher could offer. Beaming a large smile, Chief Kaya offered to send Valkyrie students to escort Sensei to the Sanctum Tower, given how dire the circumstances currently were. Thanking Kaya for her help, Rin began to feel a semblance of her confidence returning. Perhaps not all the board members were as hostile to her as she'd suspected. If Sensei helped to moderate this meeting, it could become an even greater success, and they could potentially avert this crisis before it had even begun. With inhuman speed, Ayumu drafted letters for the heads of Kivotos' most influential schools, and soon summons were being received and reviewed by the leaders of Kivotos' most powerful academies. In the brisk early morning, the Tea Party of Trinity had received the Sanctum Tower's message and were deciding how best to proceed. Misono Mika's trial had finally reached a verdict, and although Sensei, Seiya, and Nagisa's testimony had ensured that Mika would not be expelled from Trinity, she was still liable for her actions, and as a result, she had been stripped of all of her privileges and her standing as a Tea Party president. However, until the Potter faction found a suitable replacement, Mika would retain her title as Tea Party president, in name only. But that meant that Mika's name had been included in the summons to the Sanctum Tower. Although Mika had been working hard to redeem herself, Nagisa and Seiya worried that Mika's presence at the gathering would cause friction with the other schools, particularly the leadership of Gehenna. Trinity had still been experiencing unrest amongst the student body, and although the Justice Task Force had done their best to calm the most violent protests, the situation at Trinity was still precarious. Thankfully, the events of the Eden Treaty had led to the greater involvement of both the Sisterhood and the Remedial Knights in the governance of Trinity. Utazumi Sakurako and Aomori Mine were effectively the 4th and 5th members of the Tea Party, and their attendance at the emergency committee would be a balm on Nagisa and Seiya's exhausted minds. Not only this, but according to the message, Sensei would be a key figure at the emergency committee, which was the final reassurance the Tea Party needed to accept the Sanctum Tower's invitation. The Tea Party was ambivalent about the leadership of acting President Rin, but Nagisa knew it was foolish to blindly follow the Sanctum Tower's lead. If Sensei would be in attendance, then Trinity could be assured that Mika's presence would not inflame tensions at the event, and the General Student Council wouldn't overstep their authority. Meanwhile, at the neighboring school of Gehenna, the Pandemonium Society had just received their own summons from the General Council, causing Secretary Iroha to sigh openly. This was the last thing that Gehenna needed right now. Tensions had never been higher between the Pandemonium Society and the Prefect team, as the Eden Treaty had exposed President Makoto's incompetence as a leader of one of Kivotos' most powerful schools. If the Gehenna student body wasn't so apathetic towards politics, President Makoto would have been ousted in an instant, but hardly any students were even aware that Makoto was the president, and so she remained safe in her position, at least for now. Mercifully, Makoto's schemes had lessened considerably since the events of the Eden Treaty, her attention drawn more towards doting upon Pandemonium member Ibuki. But Iroha was still grateful that Sensei would be in attendance at the emergency committee. She would take as much help as she could to keep Makoto in line, as the General Council and the Gehenna student body were not interested in holding the Pandemonium president accountable otherwise. On the other side of Kivotos, an invitation arrived at the desk of the Millennium President, which sat empty, its owner still missing ever since the events at Eridu. In her haste to send out urgent messages, Ayumu had accidentally sent the Millennium Summons to President Rio, who had gone into hiding after the Ark of Atrahasis had almost been summoned into Kivotos. The acting heads of Millennium, Ushio Noa and Hayase Yuka, were left unaware of the emergency committee, and so the Millennium Summons were left unread in Rio's mailbox. Although Trinity, Gehenna, and Millennium were the largest schools, Ayumu had also made sure to include smaller schools that still held significant sway over the city. Hyakuyako's Yin Yang Club, Shan Haijing's Genryuman, and Red Winter's Secretariat had all been invited to attend, and for the first time in many years, Abydos's Foreclosure Task Force had been invited to the table of the General Student Council. However, much to Rin's surprise, Abydos had declined the invitation, stating that they had other pressing matters at hand. During her morning bike ride, Shiroko had noticed that Kaiser forces were congregating in the Abydos Desert, and the Foreclosure Task Force would be mobilizing to investigate what was going on. It was a bittersweet moment. After so many years of being ignored by the General Student Council, the Abydos Student Council had finally received an official summons, but they would have to skip this meeting. Hoshino and the Foreclosure Task Force trusted Sensei to pass along any necessary information to them, and once they had resolved this issue with Kaiser, they would gladly take that seat at the Kivotos political table. Back in the capital of Kivotos, Sensei was making their final preparations before heading out to the Sanctum Tower. Ayumu had included additional documents in Sensei's letter, which appeared to be energy readings that Momoka had detected earlier. Although the Sanctum Tower cameras had not detected anything visually, these energy readings clearly showed 6 masses descending upon the city, and Momoka had marked exactly which parts of the city were affected. One mass was descending onto the Abydos Desert. Another was above the abandoned amusement park within the DU. One was above the ruins at the border of Millennium. Yet another was above the Trinity Catacombs. One was descending on the district of Eridu. And a final energy mass was directly above the Sanctum Tower. The locations were ominous. With the exception of the amusement park, all these locations were ones that Sensei had visited recently, and they'd all been the sites of catastrophic incidents throughout the city. Although the Abydos Foreclosure Task Force wouldn't be in attendance, the teacher was grateful that Rin and Ayumu had managed to summon so many other student councils, as they would need all the help they could get in resolving this crisis. Ensuring that the Shatim chest and Arona were safely tucked inside their satchel, Sensei headed out to the landing pad on Schale's roof. A Valkyrie helicopter was already waiting to transport them to the Sanctum Tower. Although privately, the teacher had hoped that the Rabbit Squad could serve as their escort, Chief Kaya had already made arrangements for Valkyrie to pick the teacher up. And so, Sensei stepped aboard the helicopter, taking one last look at the Schale building before the Valkyrie escort departed for the General Student Council. As the leaders of Kivotos' most powerful schools began assembling for the emergency committee, the chief of finance, Oki Aoi, was completely out of patience. Rin may be a competent administrator, but she had overstepped her bounds for the last time. For the entirety of her time as acting president, Rin had taken every opportunity to cement her position in the president's absence. Rin's calls for SRT's closure had led to the injury of many board members, and as Aoi had begun digging into Valkyrie's finances, she'd been finding horrifying misuses of Sanctum Tower funding. Right under Chief Aoi's nose, the Sanctum Tower had been funneling money to the Kaiser Corporation and aiding Kaiser's various construction projects. Although it was clear that Kaiser had other funding outside of the Sanctum Tower, this was still an egregious and illegal misuse of General Council funds. Admittedly, much to Aoi's frustration, the documents were entirely anonymous, only bearing the seal of the General Student Council. But that only made Aoi more certain that Rin had tried to cover up her tracks. And now, just as Aoi had discovered this information, Rin had called for an emergency committee, which was clearly a move to seize power from the Chief of Defense Kaya. Aoi had put up with this charade long enough. Interrupting the emergency committee was out of the question. It would benefit no one to expose private general council matters in front of Kivotos' most powerful leaders. However, the emergency committee would last just long enough for Aoi to ensure that Rin's days as acting president would soon be over. Transportation Chief Momoka and Secretary Ayumu would almost certainly be against removing Rin as acting president, but Aoi had more than enough support from the other board members for this motion to go through, sending out an urgent message to the remaining board members who were not still in the hospital. Aoi called for a vote of no confidence to remove Rin as the leader of the Sanctum Tower. Within the darkened office of the Chief of Defense, Kaya had just received Aoi's notice calling for the censure of acting President Rin and her removal from the Sanctum Tower's leadership, and Kaya could scarcely suppress her complete and utter glee. She'd waited for this moment for so long, but it had come much quicker than she had anticipated, thanks to the impatience of Chief Financial Officer Aoi. Admittedly, Kaya was unsure of how Aoi was able to trace the financial records from Kaiser. The Chief of Defense could have sworn that she had made those records undetectable, but thankfully, Aoi had been unable to determine the document's origins and had assumed Rin was the person responsible for them. Aoi was truly an excellent administrator, but she was easily blinded by her emotions. It was unbecoming of an officer with such power, even if it benefited Kaya in this one instance. It was such a pity that Kaya was surrounded by such incompetent fools. She really must have done something terrible in a past life to deserve such a headache, but at least the incompetence of her fellow council members would progress her plans for once. For many months, Kaya had been carefully biding her time, eroding Rin's authority one step at a time. all so that Kaya could sweep in at the opportune moment to seize the presidency. Everything was finally coming together, and Kaya was ready to order the Fox Squad to move forward on the next part of her plan. Bringing the Fox Squad to Kaya's side was her greatest achievement. Although SRT branded itself as pursuers of truth and justice, the reality couldn't be further from the truth. The SRT Academy was less a school and more of a military encampment, grinding up idealistic students and spitting them back out as weapons for the General Student Council president. Even though they'd started out with idealistic views of justice in their heads, the modern-day Fox Squad were SRT's most perfect unit. Trained to follow orders without question, the Fox Squad acted with impunity throughout the city, serving as the weapons of the General Student Council. SRT's training methods were brutally efficient, the likes of which Kaya had only seen in reports from Arius Academy. And that was something that Kaya admired most of all. She couldn't believe that the last council president wanted to create Schale to handle SRT's work. But when the general council president had disappeared, Kaya seized her chance to occupy the power vacuum in the SRT hierarchy. Without their commander-in-chief, it was all too easy to sway the Fox Squad to Kaya's side. After all, the new acting President Rin posed an immediate threat to their future, what with the creation of the Schale office under her rule. And once Kaya took her seat at the head of Kivotos, she would ensure that SRT reigned supreme within the Academy city. Under Kaya's orders, the Fox Squad had infiltrated the General Council and incapacitated most of Rin's supporters, leaving behind just enough board members that it wouldn't be too suspicious what had happened, while ensuring that the majority of the remaining council members were hostile to Rin. From there, Kaya bided her time, chipping away at Rin's authority bit by bit over many months, until now the moment was finally upon her. But she couldn't be too hasty. There were still several variables that needed to be taken care of. As much as she hated to admit it, Kaya's grasp over the Fox Squad was still shakier than she would like. Although they had perfectly executed the attack on the General Student Council, some of the Fox Squad members were beginning to display signs of discontent, particularly after seeing their younger Rabbit Squad members rebel against SRT's disillusion, and Kaya would need to ensure that their allegiance to her remained firm. Although the Fox Squad had long abandoned their idealistic visions of justice, the Rabbit Squad were still young and had not yet been broken under SRT's regiments. Aggravatingly, this meant that the Rabbit Squad were still willing to think for themselves. But Kaya hoped that their inexperience would open them up to insecurities that she could exploit. Kaya had hoped to bring the Rabbit Squad to her side as soon as possible, to break their spirits and add them to her SRT arsenal. But before she could meet with them, the young SRT squad had been apprehended by Sensei and Valkyrie, putting Kaya in a difficult position. Should she try to win the Rabbit Squad over now, or let their hostility grow towards Schale and the General Council, making them easier to persuade later? In the end, Kaya had decided it was safest to chip away at the Rabbit Squad's idealism over time. Let them work with Schale, who they saw as SRT's direct enemy, and have their spirits broken by being homeless in Kosagi Park. However, much to Kaya's dismay, her plans had completely backfired. Not only had Sensei won over the Rabbit Squad, but they had also uncovered the Peace Bureau's connection to Kaiser and exposed Kana's illegal deal to all of Kivotos. Kaya had no idea how the Rabbit Squad had learned of Kana's deal, but it had almost thrown all her plans into chaos. Although Kaya herself had been working with Kaiser for many, many months to fund their various projects throughout the city, all those agreements were anonymous, whereas Kana had foolishly signed with her own name on the Peace Bureau agreement. Kaya's plans had almost gone up in flames right then and there, but mercifully, she had been careful not to directly instruct Kana to do anything. She had just put pressure on the Peace Bureau director to do something, and Kana had filled in the pieces herself. As a result, Kaya's hands were clean of that scandal. And now, with the emergency committee in motion, her plans to seize the Sanctum Tower presidency were still in motion. According to the president of Kaiser Corporation, a large military detachment was prepared and waiting, ready to fall under her command once she seized the presidency. Admittedly, Kaya didn't fully trust the Kaiser Corporation. They had worked together for quite some time, as Kaiser's many mercenaries and robot soldiers served surprisingly well as ground troops in addition to the Fox Squad. But Kaya remained cautious of their mutual agreement all the same. For now, she'd have to postpone her plans to bring the Rabbit Squad to her side. If the Rabbit Squad knew what was good for them, they'd fall into line once Kaya gained control of the Sanctum Tower. Or else the Fox Squad would ensure that no obstacles stood in her way. In the current moment, however, Kaiser was waiting for Kaya at the edge of the DU, ready to move on her command, and Kaya had one last vital mission for the Fox Squad, one that would solidify her authority of the Academy City. Sending out a message to Yukino and the Fox Squad, Kaya gave them new orders. In the basement of the Schale building was a document that Kaya needed them to retrieve. On her command, the Fox Squad would need to carefully infiltrate Schale to obtain this document, all while Kaya was preparing to overthrow the General Student Council once the emergency committee had concluded. Under normal circumstances, it would be almost impossible to infiltrate Schale to obtain this document, but Kaya had just ensured that Sensei would not be in the picture much longer. Just as Kaya had planned, Sensei had boarded the Valkyrie helicopter only a few minutes prior, which meant the teacher would not be returning to Schale anytime soon. As soon as the helicopter had taken off from the Schale roof, Sensei realized that something was wrong. The interior of the helicopter was pristine, almost as if it was brand new. This was not the type of helicopter the teacher would expect to see from Valkyrie, who were still barely able to afford basic munitions. But by the time the teacher realized their mistake, it was already too late. At the back of the helicopter, hidden away in the shadows of the aircraft, were several robotic soldiers, their military suits stamped with the unmistakable insignia of Kaiser PMC. With a sinking realization, Sensei could see that the students who had escorted them into the helicopter were actually mercenaries in disguise. Before the teacher could move, the Kaiser soldiers raised their weapons, pointing them directly at Sensei. "We've secured Schale's, Sensei," said one of the Kaiser soldiers, speaking into a handheld radio.
"Good work,"
a voice crackled back in response, echoing from the radio. At first, Sensei thought the voice in the radio belonged to the Kaiser's president, but after taking a moment to think, it sounded more like Kaiser's top general.
"Continue with the next phase. Lock Sensei up somewhere so that no one will find them. And don't let them move a muscle, even if it means shooting a limb."
Feeling their pulse quicken, Sensei began thumbing through their pockets for their phone, trying to reach anyone to let them know what had happened. But the Kaiser soldiers were already moving towards the teacher, keeping their guns firmly trained on Sensei's legs. With growing horror, Sensei recognized that the Kaiser soldiers were not going to let the teacher get away, and they were going to maim Sensei's limbs in that process. The closest Kaiser soldier pointed at Sensei's legs and opened fire. Instinctively, the teacher closed their eyes, trying to brace for the pain that would hit them as soon as the bullet entered their leg. But the pain never came. Instead, the bullet lodged itself in the floor of the helicopter, almost as if it had bent around the teacher at the last moment. The Kaiser soldiers were aghast, trying to fire again and again at the teacher in a panic, but their weapons began to jam, unable to fire despite their best efforts. Realizing what had happened, Sensei instinctively gripped the Shatim chest in their satchel, feeling the warmth of the screen radiating onto their hand. After all this time, Arona was still here, protecting the teacher from harm, and so long as no missiles hit them, then Arona wouldn't let a single person harm her Sensei. Suddenly, without warning, the helicopter jolted to the left, causing everyone on board to stagger to keep their footing. Static from the radio came through, indicating that there was some sort of earthquake happening, but that shouldn't have affected an aircraft in the sky. Taking advantage of the soldiers' momentary distraction, Sensei pulled out the Shatim chest to try and figure out a way off of this helicopter. And they were greeted by an unsettling sight. Within the tablet display, Arona's quaint, sunny classroom had suddenly turned to night. To be honest, Sensei had never considered that Arona's display could change from day to night. Not once in all their months in Kivotos had Arona's digital classroom ever changed. And yet as soon as the earthquake had started, the tablet was filled with a gloomy blue light. As the teacher squinted at Arona's display, they could see something glowing in the sky behind her, almost like meteors or falling within the display itself. Arona wasn't facing the teacher anymore, turned away to look at the falling meteors within the tablet. "Sensei?" Arona's voice crackled aloud. "Something is coming." The shaking of the helicopter intensified, causing everyone to brace against the side of the aircraft. Glancing down at the screen, Sensei tried to hear what Arona was saying, but as they looked over the Shatim chest, all they saw was a dead black screen. The power to the Shatim chest had gone completely off. Panic rose in the teacher. Not now. This couldn't be happening now. Was this the power of the chroma interfering with Arona's circuitry? If they didn't get her back online soon, then they'd be at the complete mercy of the Kaiser soldiers on board. However, the Kaiser's soldiers had already seized their chance. With a swift strike to the head, the teacher was brought to the ground of the helicopter, their consciousness quickly fading as the helicopter continued to shake around them. The tremendous shaking was felt all throughout Kivotos, even in the district of Abydos, where the tremors were causing the sandy wastes to shift into treacherous sinkholes. Shiroko had gone ahead to investigate Kaiser's troops in the desert, but the shaking was beginning to intensify, and the rest of the foreclosure task force was becoming frantic. Hoshino was trying to get a hold of Shiroko, but the signal was having difficulty connecting. With a sudden click, Shiroko's voice came through the line, and Hoshino put her on speakerphone for the others to hear.
"There's a strange light,"
Shiroko's voice responded, the connection crackling as the shaking continued.
"It's almost like a rainbow. There's someone else here."
Standing before Shiroko, in the desert wastes of Abydos, was a monstrous figure. They had appeared out of thin air in a flash of light, towering above Shiroko in an instant. The being was more than twice Shiroko's height, its form cloaked in long gray and black robes. Red tendrils draped across its shoulders, trailing down into claw-like ribbons. Around the figure's head was a metal brace, securing a sunken gray mask that obscured the figure's face. Panicked voices of the foreclosure task force echoed from Shiroko's phone, but the wolf-eared girl didn't have a chance to respond. As quickly as the light had appeared, it was abruptly gone. And just like that, the shaking completely stopped all across Kivotos. The foreclosure task force hurried to Shiroko's last known location, but the monstrous figure and Shiroko herself were nowhere to be found, leaving behind only Shiroko's bicycle in the sand. Ayane, Nonomi, and Serika began calling Sensei in a panic, but the teacher wasn't picking up, and Hoshino's fists began to clench. Something had taken Shiroko, And now Sensei was inaccessible too. There was something going on in Kivotos, and it was bigger than any of them had realized. What Hoshino did know, however, was that she was not going to let things end here. She wasn't going to lose another friend. Not again. As Hoshino and the Foreclosure Task Force began scouring the scene where Shiroko had disappeared, the emergency committee was about to begin at the Sanctum Tower, and Chief Kaya had just arrived at Kaiser's stronghold to meet with their general. According to the Kaiser General, Sensei had been apprehended as planned, and that meant that their biggest obstacle was finally out of the picture. Without Sensei, the emergency committee would descend into chaos, dealing the final blow to Rin's authority and allowing Kaya to claim what was rightfully hers. The Fox Squad had already departed to secure documents from Schale's office, and that left Kaya to run through marching orders with Kaiser's troops for once she had secured the presidency. It was finally happening. After all these long months, after so many mishaps and mistakes and inconveniences, this headache would finally be over. Kaya would take her rightful place at the top of the General Student Council, and Kivotos would become the perfect city at last. Feeling excitement and exuberance rising within her chest, Kaya stepped into the Kaiser compound with unbridled confidence, only to feel a sharp pain in the back of her neck and her vision slowly growing dark. Collapsing onto the ground, Kaya's consciousness faded, and a figure stepped out towards her. With slow, deliberate steps, the general of Kaiser's army looked down at Kaya's unconscious form, directing nearby soldiers to move her to a holding cell until further notice. Kaiser had worked with Kaya for many, many months, but the girl was still hopelessly naive if she thought she could swoop in and take the presidency without an armed coup. She had wanted to use Kaiser's forces as police throughout the city, when they could have been used to take the Sanctum Tower by force instead. Kaya wanted a political coup, and Kaiser wanted an armed one, and as a result, their partnership would now have to come to an end. That was not to say that Kaya hadn't proven useful. She had helped destabilize the Sanctum Tower for many months, and had even given Kaiser information on the exact layout of the General Student Council building. That put Kaiser in an excellent position to overthrow the General Council and take their seat at the head of Kivotos' government. Now it was just a matter of waiting. Kaiser Corporation may have obtained a powerful artifact, but they needed the Sanctum Tower to power it on, and they were not about to risk an open firefight with Kivotos' most powerful leaders in the interim. Instead, they would patiently wait until the emergency committee had concluded, and after all the Academy leaders had left, that was when they would spring their coup d'etat. As the Emergency Response Committee officially began, Rin was doing her best to maintain her composure, but she was already starting to anxiously readjust her glasses. All of the available Academy representatives had assembled as planned, but as time ticked down to the start of the emergency committee, neither Sensei nor the Chief of Defense were anywhere to be found. Tea Party President Seiya, who Rin had hoped would be a voice of reason in this meeting, was instead looking at Rin with confusion and suspicion as the clock ticked down to their meeting time, and Sensei continued to be conspicuously absent. Both Rin and Ayumu had made increasingly frantic calls to the teacher ahead of the meeting, but Sensei had never responded, and they couldn't put off this meeting any longer. Already, the tension in the room was ready to burst. Mika from the Tea Party and Makoto from the Pandemonium Society had been seated opposite each other, and it felt like a fight would break out at any moment. Meanwhile, the Millennium representatives had not even shown up, their invitation left unread in President Ryo's mailbox. The Red Winter president, Rankawa Cherino, was demanding to know why there was no pudding available as refreshments, and the representatives from Hyakyako and Shanhaijing were eerily quiet, impatiently listening to the chaos beginning to unfold around them. Taking a deep breath, Rin called for silence, trying to break the tension before it grew any further. Pulling out the first slide for the emergency committee, Rin began addressing the assembled Academy leaders, explaining the reason for this meeting, as well as what the General Council had found. Momoka had recorded 6 high-energy masses descending upon the city, and the General Student Council was looking for help from all the assembled schools to monitor the situation and coordinate a defense response when the pillars did manifest. However, before Rin had even finished her opening statement, the emergency committee had burst into a flurry of questions. The 5 leaders from Trinity were demanding to know why Sensei was not in attendance, and Gehenna's leader Makoto declared that Rin must be hiding the teacher, clearly using this emergency committee as an excuse to gain more power over the schools. Rin tried to call for order, stating as calmly as possible that they were doing everything they could to locate Sensei, but this only agitated the group further. The Tea Party members began making worried calls to the teacher, but nothing was going through, prompting alarm in the chambers. One by one, the assembled leaders rose from the meeting table, declaring that until Sensei was found, the entire emergency committee was suspended. If there really were pillars descending from the sky, then the Academies would handle it on their own. But until Sensei was found, the Academies would not trust anything the General Council had to say. Feeling her stomach turning, Rin tried to keep everyone assembled, but the damage had already been done. Even at the best of times, the General Student Council maintained a tense relationship with Kivotos' academies, but the past few months had almost completely eroded any trust in the Sanctum Tower. As the Academy representatives exited the meeting room, Rin and the remaining General Council staff were left without any options. Ayumu's head fell into her hands, and Momoka had collapsed on the table, utterly defeated by how disastrous this entire meeting had been. Pulling out her phone again, Rin desperately tried to reach Sensei, hoping that this time her phone would connect. But the call went to voicemail once again. Rin began to wonder if maybe this was all her fault. This entire meeting had fallen apart because Kivotos' Academies didn't trust her leadership. And now, what if something had happened to Sensei because of her? Rin's limbs felt like lead as she rose to her feet, only to see the stern, unflinching expression of Chief Aoi walking through the meeting room towards her. At the sight of the Chief of Finance, Rin felt like she was going to be physically ill. She really could not handle a lecture right now. But if this was like all her other interactions with Chief Aoi, then she'd have to deal with being chewed out for at least a few minutes. Before Rin could ask what Chief Aoi wanted, however, the financial officer had pulled out a white slip of paper filled with the signatures of a majority of board members. The paper in Aoi's hand was a vote of no confidence, which had removed Rin as the head of the Sanctum Tower, censuring her actions until further notice. The General Student Council would be effectively paralyzed until another vote was conducted the next day, but it was a risk that Aoi was willing to take. Rin would no longer hold power over the Sanctum Tower, and after a Board of Administration hearing tomorrow, a new path forward would be determined for Kivotos' highest office. Ordering everyone to leave for the day, Aoi began motioning for everyone to file out of the meeting room. Momoka and Ayumu looked at Rin for guidance, unsure if they should follow Aoi's orders or remain with Rin. The former acting head gave them a weak smile, thanking them for their help over these long months together. After a few painful moments, Ayumu and Momoka followed Aoi out of the meeting room, leaving Rin completely and utterly alone in the General Council meeting room. As night began to fall over Kivotos, the hallways of the General Student Council were dark and empty. Aoi had cleared out almost all the General Council staff members, carving an angry path through the building on her way out. It was certainly unintentional, but the Chief of Finance's actions had made infiltrating the Sanctum Tower incredibly easy, and that was welcome news to Kaiser's troops as they marched on the General Student Council. With almost no resistance, Kaiser's militia made their way up through the halls of the General Council, successfully infiltrating the central control room of the Sanctum Tower. Acting quickly, the soldiers disabled all the building's communications, causing all public networks in the capital district to drop in an instant. Railways were taken offline, with no travel in or out of the district, which would prevent anyone within the DU to call for help from neighboring academies. Under the orders of the Kaiser president, the DU would now be placed under martial law. No one would be able to leave the district, and any resistance would be met with Kaiser soldiers patrolling through the streets. The Kaiser president was delighted at how well this operation had gone. It had taken an incredible amount of time and work to execute, but at long last, they had infiltrated the Sanctum Tower, and soon they would have the power to transform this city into a corporate dictatorship. Their takeover of the capital of Kivotos was almost complete. All they needed to do now was gain control of the Sanctum Tower's power reserves and use them to bring the Abydos artifact online. Almost on cue, Kaiser's top general had just located Nanagami Rin, the acting head of the General Student Council, who was still behind in the building as Kaiser's forces secured the premises. None of the other board members were in the Sanctum Tower, but based on Kaya's intel, Kaiser only needed Rin's authority to override the General Council systems and power on the artifact. However, much to their dismay, Rin didn't even need to lift a finger to defy them. Kaiser's president realized that Kaya had withheld an important piece of information from them. Rin had been the acting head of the General Student Council, but she had just been censured by her fellow board members, stripping her of any authority to power on the mysterious Sanctum Tower. A new head of state had not been selected, leaving the Sanctum Tower in administrative limbo. Powering the artifact through the Sanctum Tower would require the highest level of administrative privileges, and no one in Kivotos currently had that authority. Grinding his mechanical teeth together, the Kaiser president began thinking through alternative solutions, anything that could get them out of this predicament. And that was when an idea crossed his mind. The only entity that rivaled the General Student Council's authority was only a few blocks away. The independent Federal Investigation Club, Schale. Kaiser's forces had been unable to power on the Shatim chest after the mysterious earthquake, but Sensei's tablet was not the only way to access the Sanctum Tower. If rumors were to be believed, within the halls of Schale was another artifact, referred to as the crafting chamber, which could be the conduit that Kaiser needed to override the General Council's administrative privileges. Conveying new orders to his troops, the Kaiser president ordered that Rin be taken to Schale, where Kaiser troops would attempt to use Sensei's facilities to gain administrative rights over the Sanctum Tower. Meanwhile, all across the capital district, megaphones were blaring, announcing that Kaiser had taken control of the Sanctum Tower. From within the dark offices of Valkyrie's Peace Bureau, Director Kana listened to the announcement with widening eyes. Kaiser had taken down the communications servers within the district, which meant that outreaching the other academies for aid was out of the question. If Kana was a younger person, she might have tried rushing the Kaiser blockade at the district's borders, trying to physically reach anyone who could help. But she was too old for such delusions. Her days as the feral Hound of Valkyrie were long over. The police school had already been waning before SRT was created, but Valkyrie was now so physically and morally bankrupt that they had served as mercenaries for hire. Even if Kana wanted to, she didn't have the resources or the manpower to fight back against Kaiser. The corporation was simply too powerful, and based on Valkyrie's intel, Kaiser had managed to capture Sensei. So what chance was there that a grunt like Kana could make a difference? As her thoughts began to swirl, Kana was suddenly reminded of the resolute expression of Miyako, staring back at Kana from the rooftop of Valkyrie. It was strange. Kana had spent so long just accepting that this was her lot in life, that no matter how hard she tried, she would just be a cog in the merciless machine of Kivotos' politics. But Miyako wasn't like that. She had fought against the closure of her school, facing down Valkyrie's forces, even though her rabbit squad was horribly outnumbered. And she was still out there fighting now, keeping the people of Kousagi Park safe from people like Kana. As Kana's thoughts turned to Miyako, Sensei's words began to fill Kana's mind, stating that the ends never justify the means. And Kana realized that she was still making excuses. She'd been making excuses for years, letting Valkyrie fall into shame and disrepair under her watch. The forces of Kivotos were indeed powerful, but that didn't mean Kana could give up here. Not when there were still ways for her to fix this. She was a corrupt cop, one who had compromised her own ideals for safety. But even if redemption was outside her reach, there were still ways for her to fix this situation. Throwing on her gray jacket, Kana stood up to head out of the Valkyrie building, only to be stopped by two familiar faces shifting into the doorway. Of all people to show up at the Peace Bureau's office, Kana had not expected to see Kirino and Fubuki. The girls were part of the civilian public safety office, hardly seeing any combat in the city, but they'd more than proven themselves during the operation to capture the Rabbit Squad at Kousagi Park. Despite the overwhelming strength of Kaiser, the girls had risked crossing the DU just to reach Kana, and no matter what Kana tried, Kirino and Fubuki would not be turned away. They were determined to help the Peace Bureau director save their city. After a few moments, Kana sighed aloud. Her comrades were so young, filled with idealism and determination to do what was right. But that meant that Valkyrie wasn't completely rotten yet. These girls were the future of Valkyrie, still carrying hope that was untainted by greed and corruption. And Kana was going to ensure that they still had a future left in this city. Together, Kana, Kirino, and Fubuki laid out a plan to find and rescue Sensei, who was the key to restoring control of the Sanctum Tower. Rin's authority had been stripped by the other board members, But Sensei was still the head of Schale and could regain administrative control of the General Council if they could just get back to the Schale building. They could then restore public communications in the capital and request assistance from Kivotos' other academies, which would be their only hope of taking control back of the district. However, none of them knew where Sensei or the Shatim chest were being held, and that meant that Kana would need to infiltrate Kaiser to get that information. Although Kirino and Fubuki would be vital for rescuing Sensei, Kana didn't want to blow their cover before the teacher was found, and so it was decided that she would go in alone to Kaiser's base to get them the information that they needed. Both Kirino and Fubuki cast worried glances at the Peace Bureau director, but they agreed to follow her orders and wait for her signal to move out. Giving the girls a crooked smile, Kana bid Kirino and Fubuki farewell and headed out to the DU headquarters for Kaiser Corporation. Although tensions were running high between Kaiser and the district, Kana maintained her composure as she approached the robotic compound. If this was going to work, she needed to convince Kaiser's leadership that she was willing to work with them and that she could help them override the Sanctum Tower with the Shatim chest. That would allow her to access Kaiser's files, showing the location of the tablet and the teacher, but it was still a risky proposition. Even though she'd worked with Kaiser before, it would be a tremendous ask just for Kaiser to grant her access to such sensitive files. However, this was her only way of accessing that information. She wasn't a hacker like Chihiro or Moe, and so this plan would have to suffice. Kana could feel her hands beginning to sweat, but she fought the urge to wipe them on her jacket. There were plenty of logical holes in her plan, but she was betting on her past connections with Kaiser and their desperation to unlock the Shatim chest to get what she needed. It only took a few minutes for the Kaiser mercenaries to relay her proposal through the radio, but when they returned to her, the response was positive. She had been granted access to Kaiser's server to figure out a way to turn on the Shatim chest. Her past relationship with Kaiser had paid off, and now it was time to access the corporation's network and dig for the location of Sensei and the Shatim chest before they realized what she was doing. As soon as Kana was granted access to Kaiser's files, she quickly began searching for all the information she needed. According to the Kaiser database, the Shatim chest and Schale's phone were both held further within the compound, which would be relatively easy for her to retrieve. Sensei, on the other hand, was being held at the 3rd Satellite School of Valkyrie, near the edge of the DU. That was some distance away, but Kana was quite familiar with the area. The satellite school was in Kousagi Town, which used to be where new Valkyrie students were trained, but right under Kana's nose, the 3rd Satellite School had fallen into the hands of Kaiser Corporation, and it was now being used as a military training and containment center. It took everything in her to remain calm. Kana had been one of the last students to train at that facility, working alongside the other Valkyrie freshmen as they sought to uphold justice within the city. how times had changed. Not only was that satellite school now a military compound for Kaiser, but Kana had recently compromised her own morals to evict innocent civilians simply because she thought she had no other choice. Once they were out of this mess, Kana would gladly take whatever punishment the General Council gave her. It hardly made up for the harm that she had done, but if there was a way to repay those who she had wronged, then she would gladly do it. It was time to secure the Shatim chest before making her way to Sensei's holding cell. She might not have the power to restore the third satellite school, but she would make sure that once she was done with it, Kaiser would know why she was called the feral Hound of Valkyrie. Back at the Valkyrie office, Kirino was anxiously cleaning her weapon, while Fubuki was stress-eating even more donuts than usual. It had been some time since the Peace Bureau director had left for Kaiser's main compound, and the Valkyrie girls hadn't received any word on how the operation was going. Although all public telecommunications were down in the district, Valkyrie had some spare walkie-talkies in the office, which they had used to communicate with Director Kana over short distances. However, they'd received no word from Kana in quite some time, and the radio silence was becoming concerning. Suddenly, a crackle of static came through the radio, and both Kirino and Fubuki jumped up in unison. It was difficult to make out, but the Peace Bureau director's voice started speaking.
Engaged in battle with Kaiser troops.
Kana's voice repeated.
Prepare a retreat route at the third satellite school, where Sensei is being held.
The signal was terrible, but enough of the words had made it through for Kirino and Fubuki to act. Grabbing their weapons and whatever ammunition they could find, the girls headed out for the third satellite school, where the Peace Bureau director was already fighting her way to Sensei. Within a cold, damp holding cell, Sensei slowly began to regain consciousness. As they shifted in the cell, the teacher was relieved to discover that they did not have a concussion, but their head ached from where the Kaiser soldier had struck them. Looking up at the bars of their cell, the teacher could see two guards standing nearby, engaged in a worried discussion with each other. "Did you hear that?" one of them stated aloud. "Was that a gunshot?" Before the guard could finish her thought, the room echoed with a flurry of gunshots, striking both of the mercenaries in quick succession. Sensei slowly rose to their feet, looking at the crumpled forms of the guards before them, and saw the battered, bloodied form of Peace Bureau Director Kana emerge from the stairwell nearby. Her chest was heaving with painful breaths, but Kana swiftly reloaded her weapon and hurried to unlock the teacher's cell. Despite her collected attitude, the Peace Bureau director was an absolute mess. Her clothes were torn and ashen, with black burn marks littering her sleeves. Blood dripped freely from her head onto her gray uniform, and her cheeks were swollen and bruised. With growing horror, Sensei realized that Kana had literally fought her way through Kaiser's troops just to get them free from this cell. And Kana was not alone. Standing post outside, Kirino and Fubuki had secured a temporary escape path, picking off Kaiser soldiers to ensure that they would be able to get Sensei out safely. The teacher was absolutely dumbstruck. While they had been incapacitated and held prisoner, these students had come together to infiltrate Kaiser's ranks and determine Sensei's location. The last time the teacher had seen Kana, they had parted as adversaries. But now here she was, risking her life just to rescue the teacher from Kaiser's containment center. As soon as the teacher was free from their cell, Kana beckoned at them to follow, and without another word, the teacher followed her up the stairs to meet with Kirino and Fubuki outside. As they hurried up the stairs together, Kana filled in the teacher about everything that had transpired. Kaiser had taken advantage of the instability in the General Student Council to seize power in the city, that they had been unable to gain administrative access to the Sanctum Tower, and were now trying to use Schale's facilities to override the General Council's permissions. So far, Kaiser had been unsuccessful, but they would need to get back to Schale as quickly as possible to regain control of the district from the corporation. However, as soon as Kana finished speaking, the girl stumbled, her legs barely able to keep up with their rapid pace. They had reached the top of the stairs, where Kirino and Fubuki were waiting for them, but the Peace Bureau director collapsed against a nearby wall, her injuries starting to catch up to her. Frankly, Sensei was astonished that she had fought through Kaiser's forces on her own. Although Sensei disapproved given Kana's current state, the teacher understood why she had come alone. Kana did not want anyone else to get in trouble with Kaiser, and although Kirino and Fubuki were clearly the stubborn exceptions, Kana had been planning on taking all of the blame for herself. Once they were out of this, they would need to give Kana a firm talking to about charging into battle completely alone. It took a lot to shatter a student's halo, but Kana had taken an entire squadron's worth of bullets, and the effects of this were beginning to show. Her head wounds were bleeding profusely, and she could barely keep standing. Before Sensei could even move a muscle to help, Kirino and Fubuki had rushed in to help Kana to the ground, keeping watch over the stairwell as the Peace Bureau director caught her breath. The teacher was amazed at how close the three students had become in such a short period of time. Kirino and Fubuki were not even from the Peace Bureau, but they were determined to keep Kana stable all the same. Kana began coughing, blood spluttering from her mouth, and she produced a sleek white tablet from her jacket. "Here, Sensei," Kana breathed, shakily holding the tablet towards the teacher. Grasping the Shatim chest, Sensei could scarcely believe their eyes. Kana had not only braved the Kaiser compound on her own, but she'd done it with the Shatim chest in tow, and had not let a single bullet strike the tablet in all that time. Watching Kana take heavy breaths, the teacher's chest felt tight. These girls had risked so much just to get them out of here, and they would not let that work be in vain. As Kirino and Fubuki tried to tend to Kana's wounds, Sensei took no time booting up the Shatim chest, inputting the password for the mysterious artifact. "We thirst for the 7 wailings. We bear the koan of Jericho." With a flicker, the screen came to life, recognizing Sensei and the password, and a sobbing Arona greeted the teacher within the screen. Sensei! Arona cried, pouring tears from her virtual eyes. I'm so glad you're safe. I was so scared when the power went out. Relief and determination flooded through the teacher. Arona's classroom was still set to night, but she looked otherwise unharmed by the strange earthquake that had powered the tablet down. Arona wouldn't be able to override the Sanctum Tower until they had connected her to Schale's hardline connection, but there was still something the teacher could do to help them get out of this situation. Sensei asked Arona to send out a distress signal to see if there were any students in the surrounding area who could lend them help with escaping Kaiser's facilities. It was a long shot, as Kaiser had brought down the communications networks for the public. But Arona was a tremendously powerful machine, and if there was even a sliver of a signal in the district, that could be enough to send a distress signal for their location and get help from any students in the direct vicinity. Underneath the halls of the Sanctum Tower, in an underground communications bunker hidden from Kaiser Corporation, Momoka and Ayumu were desperately trying to get the district's networks back online. After the emergency committee had come to a disastrous conclusion, Momoka and Ayumu had remained within the building, waiting for Rin to come downstairs so they could try and come up with a plan together. However, much to their surprise, Kaiser had suddenly stormed the Sanctum Tower, forcing Momoka and Ayumu to retreat underground before they were discovered. Momoka and Ayumu would be of no help if Kaiser captured them, and so the two officers had remained hidden in the underground communications bunker, carefully trying to restore the district's networks in the interim. It was painstaking work, trying to tap into the Sanctum Tower's systems without having administrative access, but Momoka had just found a way to temporarily restore a backup server. Ayumu watched anxiously as Momoka finished flicking on the last switch, and the backup server buzzed to life, bringing back the Sanctum Tower communication logs once again. It wasn't a perfect solution, as the backup server wasn't publicly available and was for administrative use only, but Momoka and Ayumu could try to use it to find where Rin was being held captive and figure out a plan to rescue her. As the backup server came to life, Arona suddenly detected its signal. It was associated with the General Student Council, although it seemed to be an emergency backup server. The signal was weak, so there may not be much time to access it, but Arona threw all her computing power into connecting to the network and successfully accessed the server. Moving at lightning speed, Arona broadcast a distress signal to all student phones directly around the third satellite school. If she had more time, she would try to outreach Gehenna or Trinity for aid, but this was the best she could do on such quick notice. After a few moments, the signal faded, falling out of range again, and Arona's distress signal abruptly stopped. She had broadcast the signal for a few seconds, but Arona wasn't sure if it was enough, and now that the signal was lost again, they couldn't be sure if anyone had even received the message. But Sensei reassured Arona that she had done more than enough, and if help was on the way, they'd know about it soon enough. In the meantime, Kirino and Fubuki had helped Kana to her feet. They couldn't stay in this location for long. As the group started pressing onward, making their way through the Kaiser compound, they could hear footsteps of soldiers encroaching on their location. Although Kana had crippled a considerable number of Kaiser's forces, their reinforcements had begun arriving, and they'd have to fight their way through these soldiers if they wanted to escape. Kirino and Fubuki reloaded their weapons, taking positions to block Kana and Sensei from the oncoming troops. Fighting in such a tight hallway was not in their favor, but there was no other way forward, and turning back towards the containment cells would just lead them to a dead end. Kana weakly tried to pull out her weapon, but she was losing too much blood to stand up straight, and Sensei grabbed the girl just to keep her upright. Just then, a strange sound filled the air, almost like the blades of a distant helicopter. The teacher glanced to the left, where windows looked out over the satellite school below, and they saw a helicopter rushing towards their location, with the unmistakable words SRT branded on the side. Without a second thought, the teacher pulled the Valkyrie students to the side to get away from the windows. Just before the glass exploded inwards, a volley of gunfire striking at the Kaiser troops posted nearby. Swinging down from the helicopter, Miyako and Saki burst through the shattered glass windows, launching a hail of gunfire at the Kaiser forces. Against all odds, Arona's signal had successfully gone out to students surrounding the third satellite school, which just so happened to be in Kousagi Town, where the Rabbit Squad had received the urgent summons for help. The Valkyrie girls watched in stunned amazement as the Rabbit Squad laid into the nearby Kaiser troops, clearing a path for everyone to get through the hallway. Ever since the raid on the Valkyrie office, the Rabbit Squad had been slowly restocking their ammunition, selling their old waterlogged equipment, and taking odd jobs around Kousagi to pay for supplies. And now, all of that hard work rebuilding their supplies had just paid off. As the dust began to settle, Miyako turned to Sensei with a relieved smile on her face. They had been able to save Sensei, Kana, Kirino, and Fubuki from the forces of Kaiser, and now they were going to escape this compound in one piece. With Moe steering them to safety in her SRT helicopter, the Rabbit Squad, Sensei, and the Valkyrie girls had made it to safety at Kousagi Park, where Miyu had already prepared a makeshift bed for Kana to rest. The Peace Bureau director gratefully laid down, taking the time to rest after the onslaught that she had endured. Once they had secured Schale, Kana would need urgent medical attention, but for now, she was safe within the confines of the rabbit encampment. Sunlight had begun spilling over Kivotos once again, bringing forth a new day in the district and renewed urgency to regain control of Kivotos's capital. After bringing the Rabbit Squad up to speed, Sensei began laying out their plan to retake Schale. If they knew anything about Kaiser Corporation, the most dangerous soldiers would be posted at the Schale building, trying to guard the facilities while Kaiser troops attempted to override the Sanctum Tower. Based on what Kana had learned, it sounded like Kaiser's attempts to use the crafting chamber were not going well, but they couldn't bet on that indefinitely. Overtaking Schale would be a difficult operation. The Rabbit Squad was armed once again, but Kaiser's forces would be tremendously powerful. According to Miyako, It may be possible to infiltrate the building, but with the Kaiser soldiers posted everywhere, most options would require a direct firefight with Kaiser's forces. However, as Miyako continued to speak, Kirino's radio suddenly began to crackle, picking up something in the nearby vicinity. Only Kana and Kirino were carrying Valkyrie radios as a way to maintain communication, unless another Valkyrie student with a similar Valkyrie walkie-talkie was trying to connect to their frequency.
Hello? Is this Sensei?
A voice crackled through the radio.
We got the distress signal. We're coming to help.
Everyone looked at the radio in Kirino's hands until they started hearing the sounds of footsteps approaching their location. A lot of footsteps. Emerging from the Kousagi woods nearby was an entire squadron from the Peace Bureau, the office under Kana's command. When Arona had sent out the distress signal, it hadn't just reached the Rabbit Squad. A large group of Kana's officers had heard the call for help, and regardless of what Kana wanted, they were here to lend their aid. The looks of worry on the Rabbit Squad's faces completely disappeared as they realized that the reinforcements they had needed had just arrived. As they surveyed the situation, the group received one last surprising message. Although it was brief, Momoka and Ayumu had managed to connect to Valkyrie's radio signal and had given them the exact location of Rin within Schale. With this new information, they now had everything they needed to storm the building, and Miyako looked to Sensei for the teacher's orders. The teacher returned Miyako's gaze, reflecting on how much she'd grown as a leader in such a short period of time, and knew that their own tactical expertise paled in comparison to hers. "I'm following your lead, Miyako," the teacher stated. "I'm here to support you." Surprise flickered across Miyako's face at the words, before gripping her weapon more tightly and returning the teacher's conviction. "Understood," Miyako said in response, turning to address Kirino, Fubuki, Valkyrie's Peace Bureau, and the rest of the Rabbit Squad. "Everyone, let us begin Operation Recapture Schale." At the highest floor of Schale's offices, the highest-ranking general in Kaiser's army was making his final preparations. News of the teacher's escape had already reached the Kaiser general, and he'd ordered the mobilization of Kaiser's Special Operations Force, or the SOF, to ensure that no one would be breaching Schale's walls anytime soon. Considered to be Kaiser's strongest military force, the Special Operation Forces were originally created as a measure to fight against the Fox Squad in the event that Chief Kaya ever betrayed them. Although the mysterious SRT squad had yet to make an appearance, no news was good news, and the Special Forces would be more than enough to fend off Sensei's pitiful militia. Distant shouts echoed through the hallway outside, and the Kaiser general froze, looking at the door in confusion. That shout wasn't the shout of a student. It had been one of the Special Operation Forces. Had the Fox Squad finally made an appearance? Ugh, why? Why had they appeared now of all times, when they could have attacked during the night? The sun was shining brightly over Kivotos now, and any stealth operation would be considerably less successful unless this wasn't a stealth operation, and Schale was under attack from the outside. Hurrying to a nearby window, the Kaiser General looked down at the street below him and felt his mechanical gears quake. Dozens of Valkyrie students were storming the building. The general stumbled backward as the entire building shook, and he spotted an SRT helicopter shelling the base of the building, striking at any special forces that tried to interrupt the assault. Spinning back to Schale's desk, the Kaiser General began scrambling for his radio, trying to outreach Kaiser's main office. It was inconceivable. SRT and Valkyrie had teamed up to attack the Schale building, and if the general didn't get the president on the line quickly, then they would lose their primary way of overriding the Sanctum Tower. A loud thud reverberated through the room, and the Kaiser General's head snapped towards the door, where students were already trying to break in. He had no time. If the Fox Squad was on the other side of that door, then the general would be done for. There was barely time to think before the office door cracked inwards, and several SRT students raced through the broken door into the room. However, much to the general's surprise, the SRT students before him were not foxes. They were the Rabbit Squad, the less experienced squad that had recently fallen under Schale's protection. Confusion raced through the Kaiser General. The Special Operation Forces were supposed to be comparable to the Fox Squad. How in the name of Kivotos had the Rabbit Squad defeated them? Perhaps the Special Forces were not as powerful as Kaiser had suspected, or they were simply overrun by the sheer number of students storming the building. Yes, that had to be it. The Rabbit Squad was hardly a military force worth worrying about. Surely they had teamed up with Valkyrie to make up for their lack of experience. They may have broken through the Special Forces, but the general was a seasoned commander, and he had one last trick up his sleeves. Holding up a receiver in his hand, the Kaiser General called out to the Rabbit Squad to freeze. He was holding the detonator to a series of explosives, which would level the entire building if they made another move. Although the Rabbit Squad had, inexplicably, already shelled some of the building, they surely were not intending to destroy it entirely. After all, there was a hostage inside, and if Schale was going to go down, then the Kaiser General would do it by his own hands. The leader of the Rabbit Squad, Miyako, kept her eyes locked on the Kaiser General, her lips moving as she whispered something into an earpiece. The general couldn't make out what she'd said, but he was realizing that something was amiss. The Rabbit Squad should be a group of 4, but only 2 of them were here in this office. The helicopter outside was being controlled by one of them, but that just left their sniper unaccounted for. A sharp crack echoed through the room, shattering a window nearby, and a bullet pierced the general's hand. Pain jolted through the general's entire arm as he collapsed to one knee, the detonator crumbling to pieces from the impact of the sniper shot. As Miyu's excellent shot took control of the situation, the Rabbit Squad did not miss a beat. In unison, both Miyako and Saki raised their weapons to the general. It had taken the forces of Valkyrie and SRT to storm the building, but that did not make them weak. The Rabbit Squad had done what the Fox Squad could not, and had bridged the gap between SRT and the Valkyrie Police School, successfully recapturing the Schale building in the process. As soon as the Kaiser General had been apprehended, Miyako announced that Schale had been recaptured. The Rabbit Squad evacuated the 2 individuals still left in the Schale building, former acting President Rin and Angel 24's employee Sora, who had hidden away in the convenience store when Kaiser first stormed the building. Both girls had been in isolation for quite some time, and Valkyrie provided them with blankets and food supplies as they waited for the next move of their operation. Inside the Schale offices, Sensei hurried to the main control center, connecting Arona and the Shatim chest to the building's network. It took several painful moments to connect, but with the hardwired connection, Arona was finally able to reach the Sanctum Tower's main servers. And with the authorization from the crafting chamber, she transferred control of the communication networks back to the General Student Council. As soon as this happened, Momoka began working immediately on restoring the public communication networks, and within a minute, DU's cellular and internet networks were functional once again. As soon as the public communication network came back online, Sensei's phone began buzzing off of the desk, hundreds of missed calls slamming into their inbox. Startled, the teacher picked up the phone to start going through the messages, but they were interrupted by an incoming call from Momoka and Ayumu. Sensei had to hold the phone away from their ear as Momoka exploded with excitement, yelling that they could finally outreach all the neighboring schools to overtake the Sanctum Tower once again. However, much to everyone's surprise, it seems like they may not even need to send a message for help. Ayumu interrupted to say that the security cameras showed that Kaiser's troops were evacuating the Sanctum Tower. As soon as the communications had been restored to the Sanctum Tower, the president of Kaiser had seen the writing on the wall. It had been one thing to infiltrate the General Student Council and take over before any other schools knew what had happened. But now that the communications were back online again, Kaiser would not be able to fend off attacks from Kivotos' most powerful schools, and the president was determined to make their retreat before anything else happened. However, Kaiser would find a rude awakening at their nearby bases. While Valkyrie and the Rabbit Squad were fighting back against Kaiser in the capital, the Fox Squad had made their way to the containment center where Chief Kaya was being held. With brutal efficiency, they had taken down all the soldiers who stood in their way, laying waste to Kaiser's containment centers and leaving the company in a much worse position than when they had started. Squad leader Yukino confirmed that Kaya had been successfully extracted before ordering the Fox Squad to retreat. Sergeant Nico followed alongside Yukino, her face a mix of complicated emotions, before the Fox Squad and Chief Kaya disappeared once again. Back at the Schale office, Sensei finally began to look through the mountain of missed calls. According to Arona, Sensei had over 250 missed calls from a staggering number of students, many of whom had tried multiple times to reach the teacher. Seiya, Mika, and Nagisa had all reached out separately, desperately trying to make sure that the teacher was okay after Sensei had missed the emergency committee. Yuka had sent several frantic messages after she found out that the committee was taking place, asking for Sensei to stall the meeting until Millennium got there. But her later messages indicated that she had been blocked from entering the capital district and was trying to figure out what was going on. Hanako had also sent a worried message stating that the DU had gone dark, and a similar message also arrived from Himari, who had seen that the Valkyrie security systems had gone offline. Most painful of all, however, were the 2 voicemails from Rin, begging to know where Sensei had gone, and asking if it was her fault that the teacher had disappeared. The teacher looked out the window, staring at the enormous Sanctum Tower several blocks away. Once this was all done, they would need to give Rin a gigantic hug. The poor acting president had gone through so much in their absence. Looking back down at their phone, Sensei saw there were still a few messages left unread, all of which were from members of the Foreclosure Task Force. As the teacher began to listen through them, the color began to fade from their face. Hoshino, Ayane, Nonomi, and Serika had all sent the teacher a string of panicked messages, frantically describing how Shiroko had disappeared during the sudden earthquake. According to the group's last communication with Shiroko, a strange light had descended into the Abydos Desert, and someone had appeared before her, taking her away before the Foreclosure Task Force could reach her. As the teacher finished listening to the messages, they felt their blood beginning to run cold. Despite everything, despite how hard they had worked to regain control of the city and stop Kaiser in their tracks, the future that Sensei and Seiya had foreseen was beginning to occur. The Sanctum Tower had already confirmed that 6 energy masses were descending onto the Academies city, and now that Shiroko had been captured, the Chroma was beginning to make its next move. But Sensei would not let this be the end. No matter what visions they had foreseen, the future was not set in stone, and Sensei would not let any harm come to their students. With the Sanctum Tower secured and Kaiser on the run, the citizens of Kivotos' capital were unified for the first time, and Sensei knew what they needed to do next. Pulling out their phone, the teacher began sending messages to the most tactical, brilliant minds within Kivotos, and called for an urgent meeting. The Chroma may be coming, but Sensei would ensure that Kivotos would be ready for it. The curtains close on our story for today, but join me next time for the final conclusion of our first arc. Thank you so much for watching this. I am beyond thrilled that I was finally able to release this. It took a long time to figure out how to bring everything together, particularly given that Volume F has so many events happening simultaneously. But I am so happy that everything finally came together. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see my live reactions to the story, I have several Volume F streams on my channel, as well as some playthroughs of events that I haven't been able to cover in Lore Archive. However, I will be covering the main story in our next installation of Lore Archive, So if you want to wait for that, then please do so. I appreciate it. It means a lot that you all have given such kind support, and even just watching this video, sharing it around, or I don't know, doing the usual. What do the YouTubers say? Subscribe, like, comment on the video. God, that feels weird. But anyway, just watching the video helps a lot, so thank you. Thank you all so much for your patience as I've been putting these videos together. It's been a lot of work to compile all the scripts and edit everything together, so I cannot thank you enough for giving me the time I needed to put all this together. I'll be working hard on the final video of our first story arc, and I want to do that as much justice as I can, so thank you again for your understanding as I put all of this together. Until we meet next in the capital of Kivotos, I wish you all the best, and please look forward to the next installation in our story, where all miracles begin.